Okay, let me welcome everybody back to the book symposium on Milan Bensussen's Indexicalism. And our first talk today is by Aha Elsa, and it's titled Dikembe Marcel and the Metaparadox from Indexical of Ism.
Hi, sorry, yeah, thanks. Was that my introduction? Sorry, I cannot see you. Okay, I assume it is. Okay. It's yeah. I feel slightly kind of like very much other within the symposium, and I hope that everything will go okay with what's going to come here. There is, if you look at the chat, there is a link there to, it starts etherpad.wikipedia.org/p/p Indexical. That is basically the notes and text that I'm going to refer to. And it's on a pad, so anyone can write, and so please interject and let me know if you wrote something there, if you want to discuss something. I'd like it to be more like a workshop rather than a presentation. So stop me, just stop me, and we will go around and around. Okay, so I want to, the idea is to, I'm trying to sort of like connect a little bit with what was discussed in a few other sessions, maybe, because it feels for me like I have a certain feeling like it's going to become very violent or something. I don't want it to be violent or brutal or even. So I'd like to start with a quote from Christopher Ray Alexander that reminded something that I think is kind of like apt to what the intention here. It says, Bensussen and Paniker's respective approaches consider conversation to be the most apt metaphor for thinking of and from situated interiority. The conversational speech is essential to Bensussen's advance beyond Heidegger's, that word in German. It manifests in the way in which indexicalism and the metaphysics of the others are driven not by the danger that being is in, but rather by the appeal of the others and the effort to do justice to what is perceived. The metaphysics of the others is accordingly a conversational metaphysics. So I hope that maybe there will be a conversation here rather than a presentation. Now, yeah, you can see this. This is like a selfie. Let's call it a selfie. Because what Dira is doing here is looking straight at the viewer, which was certain radicality at that time in Europe. Dira also has an index finger pointing at themselves. That they are the God, and as the God, they're also the indexicals. This here, we will talk about later on, hopefully, that is another kind of indexical. And here we have someone that I hope will come clear later on. And in this way, we kind of like, I'm trying to do like an actual alteration of our own perceived indexicalism. Let's just say that you're looking at someone called Elsa. Anyone feels familiar with Elsa? Yeah, I guess the silence is a no silence. Now I will continue here to a different painting. It's we're looking at the Eve section from Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel sections. Yeah, there is an Eve that you can, if you look at the hands. For me, it says Eve is saying thank you, and the deity is saying, well, that's okay. Anybody sees something different? Any other idea?
I could also interpret the gesture of the deity as an exhortation to come out from Adam's body.
Okay. So are we here in a certain motion? You just came. I did this this hand gesture. Sorry. You came out, and as she comes out, she's saying thank you. Is that the way you read it?
The way I read it is that he is ordering her to come out. He is exhorting her to come out, and therefore that there is a sort of dynamicity which is bidirectional. She is coming out and thanking for being brought into life, and he is asking her to come out and actually pulling her strings to come out.
I buy that one. I bought it, and I raise you. I'll raise you an Adam in a second. Any other ideas? Yeah. Now I want to we agree on the thanking, okay? And I would like to note here that again, this is English, well, Germanic English, that thanking is thinking, is related to thinking. Heidegger had quite a lot to say about that, and in a sense that there is a call, and the thinking is a response, is responding to a call, and just like a thanks, and so we have the and for me, and now I'm kind of like making a certain jump from there to slightly Derridian thing. That for me there is a justification there, and also, I mean, Heidegger says that thinking has it justifies itself. But for me, the thanking makes it just, makes the almost the arbitrary take on the call just, and in that sense, it's a different it's a different kind of thinking, and a different kind of perception of, if you like, of a world than this one of indexing. I'm not saying that thinking doesn't have indexicality, but it's a different kind of indexing.
Can I briefly suggest something, if you don't mind my stopping for a second?
Please.
I also perceive something very different between the two figures. In this second one, Adam is being created, but while he is being created, he seems to be already on the same plane than the God who creates him. Look at the expression of his face. It is placid. He is being created in this dimension in which he appears, but it is as though they are exactly in the same level. If you go back to the calling of Eve outside of Adam, you can see that in the face, there is a sort, in the face of Eve, a sort of violence that contrasts with Adam's placidness. There is a sort of appearing into a domain which looks as though it is frightening, or at least convulsioning Eve. She has a face of someone who appears in a completely new, perhaps terrible, incomprehensible domain. None of this is perceived in the creation of Adam. He is resting calmly with a serene face.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that's the kind of comparison that I was about to make, to say that this is a different kind of indexicality. Mm-hmm. That this is, here we have, so if the Eve has the thinking, Eve has to negotiate with the world, if you like.
Right.
The Adam is the index. Mm-hmm. The Adam is restful, doesn't need to think much.
Right.
Indeed, again, I know that the traditional sort of reading of the hand of God there is that very similar to what was mentioned earlier regarding Eve, that I bring you to life, but there could be another reading that you come out of me, that I, the God, I make I make life, and I'm the index, and now you will be the index. You will be the index for anything else. Everything else will have to work according to you. And you don't have to think. You don't have to do anything. You can be, as you said, fairly restful.
She's hostile. She needs to be called, and he's just.
He's resting.
He's resting, and
yes. And he's the index. I mean, if we looked at if we thought about it in terms of thinking, I would say that Eve has to think. Adam doesn't.
Very interesting, extremely interesting. Thanks a lot. Very interesting.
Thank you. Now, I'm going to move here to someone that I don't know. Again, I kind of like. Thank you. Are you guys familiar with basketball?
No, not at all.
Okay. So now that's the Dikembe in the title comes from Dikembe Mutombo, and who, in his words, came to the NBA, which is the kind of top basketball league in the world, came to the NBA's Hall of Fame, as they call it, for finger wagging. Okay, in his words, it's not like for his fantastic basketball skills, but finger wagging. Okay, and here what you see is him playing his playing days of finger wagging, because this is from a game, from a celebrity game. After he stopped playing, and here that's where he receives his nomination to the Hall of Fame, and he's doing his. That's why he's there. Okay. Now the reason for finger wagging was basically that he was very good in stopping other players from putting the ball into the basket, and when he stopped them, stopping legally, everything is fine. Yeah, he would wag his fingers at the other players, saying, "Hey, basically, I'm your index. Yeah, if I'm here, you're not going to put the ball into the basket." Okay, now. There's a very famous basketball player called Michael Jordan that famously once managed to put the ball into the basket over Dikembe Marcel, and then wagged his finger to the Dikembe Marcel. Now, this I'm using that here after the Adam, because I think it kind of demonstrates that it's not a misreading of finger wagging and using the fingers as the index finger and power. Now, sorry, I cannot see your faces, and I apologize. So it's very hard for me to tell whether what is going on with me and you guys. Now, what I'm trying to do here is okay. If you guys go to the etherpad.wikipedia.org/p/Indexical, you will be able to read my notes for this session, and hopefully, I can see that some of you are there. And hopefully, now when I start to say things, they will also make more sense. So the Dikembe Marcel is a language, okay, that I'm trying to develop here. A language that like many other things that were mentioned in the sessions here, has to start with nothing. In some kind of space, or some kind of an interval, and I'm trying to find here different intervals, different kinds of intervals. If you scroll down, you'll see it says if, else, into, sheep, like a state of something, yeah, rather than a sheep, a boat. Else, into, ness, or else, intuitiness, or then so we have something else that goes into a sensation of going into something, just that's where it's moving, yeah, and then it kind of has a different possibility of EIS/N/ITN, which is to do so. They all come together with the forward slash in a sense, yeah, as a certain kind of movement that is into nothingness, if you like, yeah, or emptiness, space, or at least in sensation. Now we have a different kind of beginning, which is again, I remember from yesterday, for example, someone mentioned the empty vase and as a deity, but it's also that lambda begins with lambda language or lambda. Lambda computation, it begins with nothing in a sense, just a sign, an arbitrary sign. So we have here if into, just into, and then there is a space, that sign which I use, which is a caret. Now this has a now okay, if we stay in that, because it seemed for me arbitrarily that this will be an easier or a simpler sort of beginning. So our language has a name, and with it conditions. Conditions allow intensities to have a go at attempting to live, to have a life. And I'm saying that conditions, just like we have the conditions on planet Earth and conditions on other planets, say Pluto or whatever, yeah, which allow or disallow certain kind of life. So Dikembe Marcel. So if we have if into Dikembe Marcel ness, okay, into Dikembe Marcel ness without the space before, or if into Dikembe Marcel hello-ness, sorry, Dikembe Marcel-ness, hello-ness. I hope that it begins to make some kind of offer the kind of possibilities of sharing stuff, sharing different thoughts that come from a combination of Dikembe and Marcel. Any thoughts so far? Yeah, I don't hear anything. I guess it's not there. So I want to try with and before I go to the Marcel element of Dikembe, I'd like to go into love, and philosophy is infused with love, obviously, because the philo bit, yeah. But love always has a difficulty, a paradoxical element as well. That it's going to kind of how do you love someone, and they need to remain the same someone, free someone that you came to love. So how, which is, I think that this kind of mirrors the kind of paradoxicality that that Hilan is talking about in the book, which is you need to you kind of you want to gather something, but if you gather it, then that something is gone. And this, I think, can bring us to the other sort of indexicality that sorry, where is it that we have here, and how it comes with Dikembe. There is I don't know, is anyone familiar with a book called Kant after Duchamp? Okay, it's
yes, Thierry de Duve, right?
Yeah.
It's an article actually, right? Like Thierry de Duve, Kant after Duchamp. Yep.
Kant after Duchamp, and anyone familiar with art's necessity to exit from contemporary art?
Yes, Sohail Malik, yes.
Sohail Malik, yeah, you're familiar with that. So you're familiar, yeah, fantastic. So I'm sort of like coming from these. The idea that that's the if you like the Duchampian Indexical, let's call it like that for now, works as look, this object is not art, but I'm the artist. I'm saying it is art. So if you say that this is not art, you're saying what I'm saying, so it is art. Yeah, but if you say that it is art, then it is art, then everything is fine. Okay, which is the sort of like the point that that Sohail Malik is taking, and say, look, we have a kind of contemporary art problem as to, because if you every time you're trying to negate art, then you're doing the Duchampian move or the Duchampian Indexical, and then what happens? You're back. You're back where you started. Again, we're back into that kind of paradox, or the paradoxicality, and that's why I'm trying to now take it slightly differently. In a sense, again, I'm using that fountain because it is indexical, but it also brings us, I think, hopefully it can bring us into a certain conversation here, some of which maybe were kind of like different kind of beats of it were talked, I think, in one of the first sessions, in the sense of the relationships of iconization and metaphorization with Indexical, but also in terms of changing of the ability of the index to alter. Now, so I'm just looking for something because something got lost for me here. Hopefully it will come. The fountain has different narratives as to how come it's here with us. Okay. Now in about 10 years ago, some people, I don't know exactly who, took this an image of the fountain to Afghanistan, and and showed it to women in Afghanistan as some kind of teaching about the greatness of Western European art. Something that they, according to the reports, didn't go down exactly very well there. Now, they told the story of Marcel Duchamp with the urinal, but there is a different story, yeah, and the story is with another artist, someone called Elsa Freytag Loringhoven. Anyone familiar?
Sorry, Aha, just before you pass on to the next image with Elsa, I just would like to point out that on my reading, the fountain contains a sort of paradoxical indexicality, because it is not a fountain from which water comes, but it is a fountain which awaits that something like water goes in it. So the here and there, in this sense, are dissolved as to their respective positions, in the sense that the water is the P, right? And it goes into the fountain. It does not come out of the fountain, which is what one would expect.
That isn't entirely. I thought that is slightly about it slightly differently. Okay, because and maybe I have the operation of this slightly different in the sense that it is there is water coming into it doesn't into the fountain as a part of the operation of it.
Mm-hmm.
So you have different kinds of water coming in. If you in that, so I guess again how you define a fountain. If a fountain is something that circulates water, then it isn't entirely then but it isn't entirely a fountain. But then you could also think about it as some kind of a metaphorical name. But the story here again is that the fountain is likely, it might be Duchamp's addition here as a name, because it could also be that he received it as a present from Elsa von Freytag Loringhoven. It could also be that he didn't receive it as a present. And there's another story that I keep wondering, what would have happened in Afghanistan if they heard that it was actually done as a protest to male wars. It was done in 1917 after the Americans joined the First World War, apparently, and the idea was that to laugh, some kind of derision of men's wars, and that was sent to the exhibition, to the independent exhibition, and was duly ignored in a sense. They didn't take it. The fact that they didn't take it then was was amplified in different different magazines, different local magazines, and they wrote about it as our mat, as the object made by our mat. Our mat was again sort of like a name that was used by Elsa. So again, the question here for me is not whether or not it is Elsa or not, but the fact that that altering the story, the narrative around it, can alter the indexicality or the indexicalityness of it. And in a sense, I find it I find certain resonances here with the question of Eve and Adam. That there is the kind of the poor Eve, the Elsa that went back to Germany and died in poverty. She had to think. And you have the other story. You know, that this is the icon of modern art, of modern European, Western European, shall we say, art. It was taken at the time as a visual icon as well. It was written about as a Buddha, as a sort of like abstract Buddha sort of image. Any interjections? No? Okay. So let's continue. Yeah. Now, Kant. I'm going back into Kant a little bit, and calling. Yeah. Now, calling and time. We have an idea by Nick Land that says that with the blockchain, we have we sort of like have an after post Kant. Anyone familiar with the book? It's not it's not called after post Kant, but it's I think it's the latest Nick Land's book of about the blockchain from 2018. Okay. The reason that he claims for that this is an after post Kantian time is that the blockchain has artificially sort of like perfect time. Everything is well timed. There's no relativity there. That's what he's using. Einstein's relativity as a sort of like a post-Kantian time. So from this, we can have a time as indexical that comes both as infinite and because of, well, as infinite and because of that relative, and a totalizing absolute as an artificialization, which for me, well, seems to bring another element of the language as well, from Dikembe Marcel language, that that we have. I want to total. I'm the index. I'm totalizing you. I'm artificial. I just managed to declare myself from certain arbitrary power. But in some ways, through that, I'm always relative, because I need you. I need your relation as well. I need the other. The index, need the other. So, for example, if we go to Land's kind of idealization of blockchain, what happens in reality is that different blockchains may artificialize time, but time, the other time always zips in. So you can get, for example, well, in Bitcoin, if you just, I'm saying Bitcoin because most people know Bitcoin, of Bitcoin, then the differences in terms of security in the Bitcoin blockchain is to do with time. If you can do things fast enough, you can trick the blockchain. You can trick it to think that the quick blocks that you managed to do are correct. Yeah, there were a few glitches like that. Yeah, it is hard, but it is possible. And the differences between different blockchains and additions to the Bitcoin blockchain has to have to do with time, with doing things quicker, with speed, if you like. Yeah. So if we go to our language, we have if, out. Now ECN is encounter. Yeah. Again, here we have so the out encounters time collapse, the sensation of, if you like, the sensation and the vitality of the time collapsing. Yeah. So time collapse nestivity. So we can have this and then take it with something else, which is Dikembe Marcelness. But for example, now we can have an out, like out of time, into Dikembe Marcel-ness, encountering time collapse ness, because time collapse nessivity. And we can write it easier. In that sense, it is a language that allow, or a way to share these sort of thoughts easier than, obviously, as it sounds, to say them. Easier than saying them. Now, the notion of developing a language like that has to do with love. That it's with an attempt, maybe a failing attempt, to offer something to share without capturing it, and to claim that, and that is in a sense the claim here. The claim here is that there is a certain way out of the paradoxicality through language, through the very language that you have to use. So, which is why I'm also trying here to use elements from the language in the Indexicality book, like encounter, and I have so I'm just scrolling down here to the section with the list of terms specifically taken from the book. So we have encounter, we have infinity, between, ultra, ultimate, totality, otherness, yeah, absoluteness as well. And they are used, these terms are used as part of, as operators in the language. So, for example, okay, let's if we scroll down, you can, if you do a find, if you click on Control F or Apple F, and then find, for example, encounter interval. If you just put encounter interval may require, I'm just thinking something easy, relatively easy. Then you will be where I am, where it has enc as encounter, encounteringness with proximity, the sense of proximity, but that might not be proximity. Okay, where so in a sense, this is the claim here is that this is an operation that again then go into could operate the language in making it share, if you like, different kind of sensations. So if we scroll all the way down on the document to where it says a call from Elsa, okay, the narrative in this language is that there is a call from Elsa as that says, look guys, you cannot do that without me. Yeah, you need to let go of Dikembe Marcel and have to add me too. Yeah, I'm yeah. Which again, it's hard to tell. It might be just a different language. So you could have the language of Dikembe Marcel. You can also have the language of Dikembe Elsa Marcel. And here, if we get that encounter anxismness proximity, yeah, we can use that as a, if you like, as an operator that can bring, if you look at the bottom, just scroll to the bottom of the page, hopefully you can see what I'm doing there, because I'm typing as I speak. Then we can say, so we had, say, something like the Dikembe Marcel ness, and now we have the encounter, the sense of proximity and encounter in the proximity that brings us elsenness. Okay. And then from this, oops, made a mistake there. Yeah. And then from this, we can go and say, you know what? Yeah, the operation, just like the operation did something. Okay, all this encounter did something. What it did is the possibility of having a different kind of language, bringing basically making it DEM-ness, if you like, or demness, which will be something other. But again, it as a language, it can, it is a different kind. It's what I'm going back to Eve. It's a thinking sharing indexical rather than a pointing indexical, or I would say even let me say it differently. It's a thinking indexicalism in the sense that it is the cosmic process of it, or what I call the cosmic process, which I'll get to in a second, is to do with thinking rather than pointing, and it's more with a thinking together rather than pointing and taking power. And what I mean by I'm looking for there is a note here to do with the cosmicity, if you like, of indexicalism, and that is to do with a reading. Again, I really do apologize if it is totally rude reading, but for me it seems evident somehow that indexicalism is a bit like metabolism or volcanism, in a sense that it's not a belief. It is, you put 1, 2 together, you get something. It's there. When I say cosmic, I talk about 2 different elements. Cosmic as a composition, as a composition that works anywhere. Okay. It comes from the fact that in Greek, the ancient Greek, the cosmos is the arrangement. That's why when we say cosmetics, we're dealing, it's a cosmic practice to do your face, because you arrange you're dealing with composition in a sense, yeah. And if we remain with the cosmetics, again, like indexicalism, it requires the different face will require something else, but it will still bring an arrangement. So that's why we have this difficulty with people with different shades of skin color that don't have the right cosmetics for them in certain geographies. So yeah, I hope it is sort of clear. So the idea with that's I mean, one of the sort of like thinking for the conditions of this kind of language is also that it is for intelligence making life. So it's kind of, it makes it hard to kind of share it with humans in some ways, which means that there's a lot to say, a lot of different notes about it. But the point is that it is to share ways of thinking, if you like, or ways of imagining, which are the imagining themselves. So and yeah, hopefully something. You know, and any questions?
Yeah, maybe it's better to stop sharing so you can see people applauding.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that'd be a good idea. I don't know how to stop sharing here.
Yeah, I think it's the same.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Any questions, discussion?
Do we have time for questions, actually, or not? Not sure about
Have I overtimed it? Apologies. I cannot hear you, Hilan.
Cannot hear you now.
I think you.
Okay. Whoa.
Okay, well,
You're muted, Ilan. Change something in your setup.
You need to unmute. So
Can
that
mute.
it goes-
Well, I mean, maybe mute now. Well, it's interesting to add that he's sharing his screen, I think. Anyways, that's what I think is happening. That's why it looks the way it is. Anyways, I don't think we have much time because we're a little late already. But yeah, so if anyone wants to do a quick comment, I find very interesting this possible connection between maybe lexicality and navigation. The idea that thinking is some sort of movement within poles that is located, the words around locations. So I think that's an interesting thing to explore. Thank you very much. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think we don't have time. I
You're not-
have a couple of questions, but we don't have time. Then we
I can't hear you,
leave it
JP.
for later. You can hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear.
No, so we'll leave it for later, perhaps. It's better, right? Because we are already late. So.
Okay. Thank you for the time and attention.
Thanks
Thanks
you.
a lot.
Thank you.
yeah.
I think you're still sharing your screen, isn't he?
Yes.
I think
still
so.
does.
Yeah.
Now,
Okay. Because So thank you very much, Aham. That was very good. So we move on. Well, I suppose we have a chair.
We'll move on to Pierre Caron of the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. Place and scale, some critical remarks on indexicalism and beyond.
Thanks. I'll start sharing my thing here. No, it's not the PowerPoint version. I prefer the PDF version. Okay. Well, place and scale, some critical remarks on indexicalism and beyond. Okay. Yeah, this was quite difficult to put together because I have this infinite discussion with Ilan, so it is quite difficult to select the points that I would like to make. So initially, this should have been a different kind of thing. I wanted to address specifically Ilan's argument about the ccparity of Geist, which I think is an important argument in contemporary philosophy. But I didn't have the time for that. I think it will need more work to be done because it deals with framework relativity and Davidson's objections to it. And yeah, so maybe we can discuss a little bit about that afterwards because I couldn't really put it in here in this presentation. Okay, so I am actually I chose a few threads. This actually started as a text about a different text because I was already trying to respond to Ilan's text, Cosmopolitical Parties in the Post-Human Age, right? So you'll see that I used that earlier text in order to understand what does it mean to have indexicality in terms of what the book is saying. One of my difficulties with the book is the fact that it's not always clear to me, at least, what does it mean to have like indexicals as building blocks of reality, because it seems that is a metaphysical conception, whereas I would think of indexicals either as well a certain linguistic form of reference, right? But also if you want to generalize it a bit, it could be a form of epistemic dependency. Like you always have to, come out, your knowledge always have to come out from some indexical situation. I feel the book sometimes is alternating between these two conceptions. Maybe there is a third, maybe these are only species to one genus that I didn't really could locate properly. So that might be maybe my shortcomings as well. But anyway, I had to build a hypothesis and on what are indexicals for this project. And for that, I was using the previous text. I was just explaining the strategy here, okay? So here I got, sorry, let me put this to the side. First characterization, I took this from chapter 2. Indexicalism can now be described as the claim that deictic operations are the building blocks of what is real, which I find difficult statement already. They compose interiorities where the great authors make an impact without ceasing to be exterior, okay? Since exteriority can never be fully neutralized in the totality, the only possible metaphysics is one that paradoxically accounts for the impossibility of metaphysics. I take that to be the most complete definition of the project, because I see all the ingredients there. I mean, in still not, of course, not full-fledged, not explicit, but implicitly they are all there. First question concerns the idea that deictic operations are the building blocks of what is real. Proper understanding of this entails deciding what are deictic operations and in what specific sense these might function as building blocks. The question of the relationship between semantics, epistemology, and ontology sticks its neck out here. Do so-called deictic operations define the ontological constitution of the fabric of reality, or is their relevancy constrained to the epistemic conditions of access to the outside? In what sense does the semantics of indexicals, on the other side, shed light on this philosophical juncture? Secondly, in what sense should a possible metaphysics account for its own impossibility? Of course, I will be dealing with the first question, not so much with the second question. This will I will leave more to the final paper. Okay. So it is my position that indexicalism is better viewed in conjunction with a couple of different texts from Benthussan that make explicit the basic commitments of the book in a more punctual and polemical way. These are Cosmopolitical Parties in the Post-Human Age, which was published last year in Triple Ampersand, and Geist and Gestell, which was published, I think, also last year in Cosmos and History. Actually, Geist and Gestell was left out of this presentation. Most of it was left out because the main issue for me, the main interesting issue with Geist and Gestell was the Society of Geist, which was Ilan's argument against Reza Negarestani's intelligence and spirit. So this was important to me. But I'll have to leave that for another occasion. Both these texts try to position a possible Benthusianian philosophy in relation to other different tendencies in contemporary philosophy, and proceeds to do so systematically. At least Geist and Gestalt demarcates a certain position from, what Ilan deems the extraction of intelligibility, which is the inhumanist position of Negarestani. And in cosmopolitical parties, it's more rich. It has several different positions. And I am even pictured in one of the positions. Ilan says I'm an inhumanist Marxist. So I'm on the inhumanist party. That is the Reza's party as well. Anyway, at least in Ilan's view. Okay, cosmopolitical parties then. Cosmopolitics in the sense of Benthusian emerges then as a set of typically non-thematized assumptions that guides action in the age of the human determination of the cosmos. At least this is what he says in the beginning of the text, that one can not do only one thing, really, right? So there is also any kind of action brings with itself a bunch of assumptions on cosmopolitics, which ultimately impinges upon a kind of cosmopolitical conception. This amounts to a lifting of the traditional philosophical idea of a background informing our sense-making practices and practical interventions upon the environment to a cosmic scale, justified by the amount of interventive power the human has gathered in our age. This is what I understand of your cosmopolitical conception, Michel. Benthusian proposes then two different axes along which one can take either a catastrophic or an anastrophic position: the nihilism axis and the capital axis. Here, the proposed meta-perspective starts showing its scholars as the knowledge axis is characterized in Heideggerian terms as nihilism. Heidegger reads Nietzsche as shaping the idea of nihilism to make explicit a cosmic plot in the saga of metaphysics. The history of nihilism coincides with the history of knowing, which is identified in the Nietzschean Heideggerian framework with the Western metaphysics as such. Its distinctive character is the view of the universe as a standing reserve for a command to be seized. Second axis is the capital axis and assembles both the anastrophic and catastrophic attitudes regarding capital's deteriorizing powers. Capital is here read in the Deleuze-Guattarian sense, filtered through the lens of Nick Land as an invasion from the future by an artificial intelligence that must assemble itself entirely from its enemy's resources. Land up with Benthusian. From this characterization, one can already see the similarities between Benthusian's understanding of capital and of metaphysics or nihilism as objectifying stances or abstractions that erode social life and disturbs the harmony between human and environment cosmos. Within this matrix, Benthusian is able to position different strands of contemporary thought, combining different permutations of the anastrophic, catastrophic axis with the capital and nihilism axis, including his own brand of what he calls post-nihilism Marxism. Okay, so in humanist Marxism is there in the axis, the anastrophic and anastrophic positions within both axes, the nihilist vertical axis and the horizontal capital axis, right? And post-nihilism Marxism is different in the sense that it maintains an anastrophic position within capital as a kind of a way to supersede, like use capital as a form of to bootstrap itself in a certain sense, which is a certain kind of reading of Marxism, right? And a catastrophic position within the nihilist axis, which is a difficult recipe to uphold, in my opinion, right? And it will be clear by the end of this presentation, I think. So second characterization comes from this passage, like we passed through cosmopolitical parties, and now I am able to give a second characterization of indexicalism. Indexicalism represents the groundwork of such a project. It rejects the age of danger represented by Western metaphysics. It starts by positing a difference between interior and exterior, which is supplemented by an account of indexical expressions in language and fleshed out in its third chapter of the book in the year by an account of perception. It declares substantivism its enemy and emphasizes the necessity of de re references. this is supposed to stop the extraction of intelligibilities that is characteristic of the age of danger. So without, cosmopolitical parties, I wasn't able to come up with this definition of the project of Indexicalism. And also I was, we had like a private also exchange of emails where Ilan told me like, I think maybe this won't still be the case, of course, this is an ongoing project, but Ilan said, I think of post-nihilist Marxism as kind of the future, what comes after Indexicalism. So in a certain sense, I'm taking Indexicalism to be the ground for post-nihilist Marxism, okay? So Indexicalism is the metaphysics for post-nihilist Marxism, as Benthussan defends. The upholding of locality all the way down functions as a threshold over which one can't legitimately operate. But this has to be fleshed out. What does that mean to have like a threshold that is determined by indexicality? You see, here's a problem. So it's a stopping point for extraction. I take it that this is the issue, right? Like Ilan wants to have a certain respect for otherness, a certain distance, and a certain also correct distance that comes from his Heideggerian also affiliation, at least in this project, it seems. So, so that a correct distance that defines a certain degree of proximity and distance that, availability is not able to uphold, you see. So even in the case of non-indexical situations, Benthussan insists upon its implicitly indexical nature, which also adds to the difficulty, okay? So I want to proceed in what follows to approach two specific components of Benthussan's framework in Indexicalism, his conception of linguistic indexicals and demonstratives, to which I would respond with a framework dependency objection, and some components of his account of measure, which I find is really, really important for Indexicalism to take off, that may have consequences to his account of perception. Together, these two strands might be able to do a figure grounding version, you see, because I was mentioning here, I was referring here to to this, you see, the fact that you have like a kind of a classification of positions with a certain set of presuppositions, you see, and kind of the presuppositions, I think it is embedded in the presuppositions the fact that abstraction might be something you can engage in or not, which I find problematic. So the figure grounding version has to do with that fact. If abstraction is mandatory, the relinquishing of abstraction is the active act, whereas if abstraction is something one do, to engage in abstraction is the active pole. You see, so there's a figure. If we do a figure ground inversion, I think the positions change, and with a change in the positions, some difficulties emerge to some positions and not to others, or a different set of difficulties come to characterize the different positions. Okay. So figure ground inversion. I intend to carry on by conceding priority to certain form of indexicality. I agree with a certain priority of indexicality, but I think there is a disagreement in the way we do this, but which won't carry the consequences Benthussan intends to, in my reading at least. Maybe I'm completely wrong, okay? In fact, conjoined, both arguments intend to show that there is no privileged scale of access that is not itself contingent. So here's the problem, like if you are dealing with the opposition between proximity in terms of Heidegger and Gestalt, it seems you have to uphold a certain specific scale of access for some being to opens itself of its own accord. Whereas if we generalize a certain form of relative indexicality, there is no privileged scale. Like, of course, I have a certain transcendental constitution. I am able to see things in a certain scale, in a certain set of frameworks. Okay, so there is a priority, but that it is contingent, because that priority is already a restriction on all the other different ways I am constrained constrained by conditions I'm not even aware of. But this is a second part of my position, objection, but that I can make myself aware of through the development of symbolic means and linguistic means. Okay? So there is no privileged scale of access that is not itself contingent. There's a lot unpacked there, as you see, which means Indexical may represent the way otherness appears, are scale dependent. While scale dependency is a form of locality, it is a locality that demands map-making abilities that are not themselves indexical. Ilan does talk about maps. I think we agree in the fact that every map is a partial map. Of course, this is kind of trivial in a certain sense, but the thing is, I am trying to classify symbolic abilities in terms of their indexicality or not. And it seems that indexicality cannot be, fundamental in the broadest sense that Ilan wants it to be, it seems. So, and the fact that some form of indexicality might be first in the order of knowing, it might not in the order of being, and retracing the full does not entail, sorry, it's not well written, I was kind of in a hurry. It does not entail, it might be in the order of being, and retracing the full extent of a mutual influences that different interiorities have upon each other might demand the mobilization of different conceptual, not necessarily indexical means. Okay? So implicit indexicality, since not all language and not everything that is said with indexicals, the challenge for indexicalism is to make sense of implicit indexicality, because it's the challenge is that to show that there is implicit indexicality in every use of language, since in the face of it, not everything is indexical. Doing so would vindicate the thesis of the fundamental character of deictic operations. While I agree with some such fundamental character in the epistemic sense, I find it hard to show that is the case metaphysically. It's important to distinguish the metaphysical importance of locality from the ontological primacy of indexicals. Alain Badiou, for instance, countenances the first without accepting the second, which means locality can be upheld from a point of view that does not entail any expressive restriction of our linguistic means in terms of indexicals. See, I take the expressive restriction to be a demand that unfolds from the critique of conceptuality as abstraction in the age of danger. Okay, just to make very clear what I'm talking about, otherwise this does not make sense. Indexicalism and the bypassing strategies. So this is a quote. Kripke uses an example from Putnam to clarify the notion of reference fixing, which is of great importance for metaphysical indexicalism. It could be discovered that cats are robots sent by extraterrestrials to spy on human domestic life. In this case, the false sentence, cats are animals, can still fix the reference of cats. Now, if descriptions that fix reference had to be true, the consequence of the discovery would be that cats don't exist. Kripke and Putnam understand that cats are already individuated, or it is precisely because of the false sentence that the discovery that cats are robots has any content. The discovery is therefore about cats identified by the false sentence describing them as animals. The false sentence manages to individuate something so that it fixes the reference of cats. In other words, it is not the truth of a description that denotes, it is not the substantive content of a description that determines what the sentence is about. Rather, it is the deictic operations carried on by the description that do the trick. The lesson for indexicalism is that reference fixing, a linguistic deictic operation, is independent of the truth of a description. Yeah, that's right. And the substantives in the description have an underlying deictic role. Okay. It has to be a causally justified role, right? Indexicalism holds that being is being indexical, and that deictic operations like reference fixing are what brings something individuated to existence. One interesting component of this indexical account is that reference fixing avoids the dicto equivocation by bypassing the necessity of substantive definition of the terms used. cat then has its use not denoting a four-legged mammal with such and such characteristics, but the initial deictic ostension that is carried over anaphorically to every other use. At least this is how I read Kripke and Ilan's use of Kripke's. Implicit indexicality then. We might have a few candidates to account for implicit indexicality. I give four. The one I just described, an anaphoric reference to some original contact that continues in its use. Two, reducibility of substantive entities to elements to which one can point to, use of demonstratives. I think this one Livingston was referring to in his presentation, and Ilan already said it's not that, like in the case of, for instance, of knowledge by acquaintance, this kind of thing, right? Three, implicit reference that is always dependent, not upon original use, but current context, even when substantives are used. So I have in a speech act situation, I say the cat is on the mat, and in fact there is a cat, but there's no mat here in my living room because I have 3 cats. So the cat is the cat, the one that is in me. An implicit range of possible reference dependent upon the transcendental structure of the knower. Of course, any substantive I could use, you could localize it and relativize it to the transcendental structure of the knower or to the local frameworks the knower can come up with that define the entities that he may point to. So these are 4 kind of different candidates for implicit indexicality. All of them are kind of strategies of localization. The problem is that the first one, for instance, does not yield localization. In fact, the indexical, the anaphoric reference, the causal theory of reference fixing dislocates. You can use it anywhere in a certain sense. So you are not necessarily making a reference to a specific context of use. So there is already here, I'm not sure I'm making myself clear, a divorce between indexicality in terms of localization to context, immediate context of use, and indexicality as a specific linguistic form that encapsulates these initial conditions in a certain way as to, in fact, be available anywhere, right? So the first is like the bypassing strategy. The 3 others are explicitation strategies. We will have to make explicit what is the framework of use of those. Of course, the second one, knowledge by acquaintance, is very familiar. Like you have to come up with a different language, like expressively restricted language in order to make visible this layer of, token reflexive entities that can be referred to by token reflexive linguistic formations. Okay. Sorry. Well, bypassing strategies rule out the dictum meanings. On the contrary, explicitation strategies get their situatedness through the reference to meaning ascriptions relative to scale and framework, which means a definition provides the proper localization of the term, but the definition makes reference to a framework described from without, which is the framework not necessarily is localized, in the physical sense. It is localized in a logical sense, but this is already kind of an expressive bootstrapping out of a pure locality in terms of what immediately is other and the grammar of one and the other, you see. That I see as the starting point of Ilan's indexicalism, like it's quite similar to the sphere of being in Hegel's logic. Wittgenstein indexicality and the framework problem. So here's a quote. Now one can ostensibly define a proper name, the name of a color, the name of material, a numeral, the name of a point of the compass, and so on. The definition of the number 2, that is called 2, pointing to 2 nuts, is perfectly exact, but how can 2 be defined like that? The person one gives a definition to doesn't know what one wants to call 2. So, locality is not, this immediate locality is not sufficient. He will suppose that 2 is the name given to this group of nuts. He may suppose this, but perhaps he does not. He might make the opposite mistake. When I want to assign a name to this group of nuts, he might understand it as a numeral. But if we believe Wittgenstein, this goes to show that non-indexicality is always implicit in the act of pointing to local appearances as well. Like if Elon wants to uphold that indexicality is always implicit in non-indexicality, I think the opposite is true. Non-indexicality is implicit in the act of in indexicality. If we don't necessarily think of this non-indexicality as full-fledged, in other words, as explicit, a child may learn the language by having objects pointed and their names uttered, while not possessing the relevant concepts to be able to ask which part, which property, which object, every act of pointing. So this is more for demonstrative. So this is more about epistemic locality than, for instance, Kripkean anaphorically derived ascriptions. The context and repetition will prepare the spot where the relevant predicate will be positioned. As Wittgenstein says about someone to whom it is explaining the moves of the king piece in chess, we shall only say that it tells him the use if the place is already prepared. So you have to have a place for that. Is that an indexical in Hilland's sense? Not sure. And this position, while relative to other grammatical positions, is not indexical in the sense of being relative to the position of the speaker. It forms a scale-dependent categorical framework. So there is the degree of independence to pure indexicality, while at the same time having localized status, okay? Because it's a scale-dependent categorical framework. So the framework problem, here's a quote by Goodman. How am I regarding time? Is how much I used?
You've used about 40 minutes. So we're a little bit.
I used 40 minutes already. Really?
I think 35 or 40, yeah.
40 minutes, 14 minutes. I forgot to see the time. And so
you started at past 10, right? So
okay, 25 minutes. Okay, that's good. That's good.
So yeah.
I'll try to keep it short now. So here's the framework problem. Once in a while, someone asks me rather petulantly, can't you see what's before you? Well, yes and no. I see people, chairs, papers, and books that are before me, and also colors, shapes, and patterns that are before me. But do I see the molecules, electrons, and infrared light that are also before me? Do I see the states or the United States or the universe? I see only parts of the latter, comprehensive entities indeed, but then I also see only parts of the people, chairs, and etc. If I see a book and it is a mass of molecules, then do I not see a mass of molecules? But on the other hand, if it's Dewey, you see a mass of molecules. So it's the Dewey ascriptions is kind of non-localized, weirdly, you see, because you bypass the framework wherein the thing is being defined and the thing is being individuated regarding a certain objective. But on the other hand, can I see a mass of molecules without seeing any of them if I cannot be said to see a mass of molecules? Because mass of molecules is a sophisticated way of describing what I see, not arrived at by any simple look, then how could I be said to see a magnet or a poisonous mushroom? I think this is kind of funny. Framework relativity seems to be compatible with indexicalism, but at the same time, the capacity to vary the scenes as proposed in the paragraph is relative to description on the side of language and to practical context on the side of practice. You see, all the time I'm kind of bumping into a kind of localization, but localization is not indexicality. Exactly. It demands treatment of the problem of criteria and measure. So yeah, this is a kind of example by Mark Wilson. I think it's clear enough. We don't need, I mean, he's showing how to plot like a bank robbery. So so you have your locality here, you see your point of view. So you have to go to have like a zigzag movement between, the map and a different indexical vocabulary that is turn right, turn left, the driver of the people that are doing the robbery. So this is a kind of navigational issue that demands, the point is that this demands, of course, indexicality, but not only indexicality, like you have to be able to build localized maps, and localization is not really indexicality in a certain sense. So indexical is a measure. Measure is also implicitly indexical because to measure is to use the determinations of one object against the other, yielding a comparison that itself gives us the unity of measure. So here's a quote I don't think we need. I'll try to finish up. Measuring then depends on a degree of constancy achieved through the comparison between elements of reality, the scale of which is invariant upon extended observation. If we also understand observation as sensing through a specific set of inputs, I'm relativizing everything, as you see, like like observation. I don't want to see like it's my own observation. Is like input through a certain set of it's like a content through a certain set of inputs. So, but then conflicts in measuring appear. So a quote Barad endorses what she claims to be Bohr's view, that indetermination is a consequence of measurement, that there is a diaphonia in the measurement procedures, and that this divergence cannot be dissolved by appeal to any matter of fact, or at least to any matter of fact independent of the experimental apparatus. Here's something interesting happened. Scale sensitivity appears as locality dependent upon the nature of the sensory inputs, measuring procedures yielding a specific sensitivity in the cognizing system that makes present for the system a world. Indexicalism shows to have its own way of building scale differences out of the interrelationship of one another with their sensitivity to each outside. Here we have already the building blocks of an escape, though, of indexicalism strictures. So we don't need this one. Okay. So let me get back to post-nihilist Marxism. Let's get back to the cosmopolitical parties framework. We've been delving into the philosophy of language in terms of which Ben Suzanne thinks his indexicalist project. We have an important degree of overlap with what Ben Suzanne deems important and some of his ideas of the original centrality of indexicality and the necessity of an active faculty of apprehension that does not let us fall into the myth of the given. I didn't have the time to talk about perception, as you see. I'm already 25 minutes in. But we have equally important disagreements that may put us in opposite ends of some philosophical spectrum. Yes, indexicality is semantically irreducible, yet it is pragmatically definable. Yes, indexicals might have a priority in the order of learning a language in a perceptual experiential context, although this does not entail that everything one does with language is hostage to indexicality. Here's the difference. Like, I feel kind of the expressive restriction that Ilan wants to come up with is a form to make one hostage to indexicality in a certain sense. And this paved the way through the imaginative variation to different scenes as to different kinds of experience in terms quite different to those that appear immediately in one's surroundings. This ultimately vindicates my initial thesis that there is no privileged scale of determination of experience other than contingent phenomenal priority, which means in turn that one is not necessarily hostage to the immediately apparent, even if that immediate appearance is, according to Ben Suzanne, negotiated with in terms of a hospitality of perception. The point remains, of course, I don't mean to say that Ilan is upholding like immediacy in the problematic sense of the given, you see, but yeah, it's more in the sense of, the expressive restriction, which I find it difficult to define whether it is only linguistic form, but then the linguistic form in terms of critical linguistic form, indexicality does not entail locality, or if it is locality, like in terms of a restriction to, the conceptualizing powers that would yield the age of danger. You see the problem. So here is a quote by Gianotti, Zerto Gianotti, philosopher that passed away. Sorry, this is unpolite. Passed away a couple of months ago. So this is kind of interesting in terms of the interrelationship between measure, the extraction of intelligibility, and practice. So the object is metamorphosed, it is worked on so that the weight property of the object, among others, can be exercised in the right condition. He's talking about a ball game here, okay? A stupid ball game. Here to determine is to negate while configuring. So the determination of a ball is to negate any other determination and to configure a certain weight relationship to the resistance of the air and to the resistance of the wall in order to do the ball game. I don't know. The effectiveness of the game, however, comes to effect this negation. As natural objects, the soccer ball and the tennis ball are like any two bodies' reaction to the impact of forces of nature, where the soccer ball is not the same thing as a tennis ball. And that is why the effective game exercises the resistance to weight in a context in which it has already been circumscribed and measured by work. It is by work, you see, not by the extraction of intelligibility is not necessarily cognitive or, by this central command that seizes control. The operational scheme constituted by the ball, by its trajectory, by the agents as pitcher and catcher, established a very elementary social objectivity. We believe that the operational scheme exemplifies in a very crude way the type of object whose plot Marx calls contemporaneous history, the structure of social relations of production constantly nourished by the repeated actions of men and which are objectified in figures such as commodities, capital, and so on. Trabalho e reflexão. The paragraph is important in a couple of different senses. First, it tries to connect the localities at place in a simple ball game as already a kind of extraction of measure and intelligibility. Secondly, this extraction of measure is done by work, by what is done, not necessarily by the adventure of abstract thought as proposed in cosmopolitical parties, which means it happens by the way things are practically engaged with, even unconsciously. Third, if every relation that determines a certain position engages in practical abstraction, I'm now calling it practical abstraction, one must not privilege only phenomenally available forms of determination. The whole bodily movement of players is engaged in the ball game beyond any thematization. The theoretical making explicit of the elements of the game is an a posteriori move. Fourth, the way the operational scheme is constituted does not demand its theoretical explicitation, although the exercise of philosophy/theory demands the explicitation of practical abstraction into theoretical abstraction, and that already demands non-indexical vocabulary. So the point here is that we are already engaged in putative abstraction by the things we do, by work, you see? And philosophy demands this kind of extraction of intelligibility that already is at place in practice, in a certain sense. So the point I'm making is in the, that idea of the inversion of figure and ground is that, abstraction is kind of mandatory, it seems. Fifth, and here's a problem for me and for Ilan, I think, Gianotti's move of connecting the practical abstraction in general to the commodity form, even if not thought as Ilan does, proposes a form of connection between different types of abstraction. This can be related to Zonhatel's identification of the cognitive powers of abstraction to the abstraction of the commodity form, putting pressure on Ilan's dissociation between the capital and the nihilism axis. Not sure if you can just uphold them separately. If you understand capital as a process enmeshed with value form, and value form as a species of which equivalence is the genus, equivalence, it can be conceptual equivalence or, value form equivalence, commodity form equivalence, weakening Zonhatel's causal relationship between both, then to uphold capital's independence from nihilism or knowledge, in order to be able to propose a post-nihilism Marxism becomes difficult. One either upholds the powers of abstraction and with it affirms both capital and nihilism, up to a point, of course. Maybe you want to come up with the Aufhebung of those, right? Or one recedes to the catastrophic positions, which in turn are prone to fall victim to previous form of oppression, the oppression of the given, with no way to concretely think one's way out of them. So final remarks. I have promised a figure ground inversion of the framework. It is not capital or nihilism that are undue expansions of an adequately measured form, like a privilege access form, but the opposites are restrictions on capital and nihilism, not in the sense that capital and nihilism ought to be accelerated, as some might suggest, but in the weaker sense already formulated. There is no privileged scale to phenomena that determine interiorities other than that which a specific sensibility of the system in question is able to detect first. The discussion becomes then not metaphysical, but epistemic ontological in the sense of disjoining epistemic priority from ontological priority. Once in the order of being no priority is given to any scale of description, it is difficult to assume indexicalism as other than a security measure for a world out of joints. Abstraction then is not something one can opt out of. It's not an ethical option one took at some point that withdrew this supposed concrete presence of things that appear of their own accord. The balance is here reversed. It is, in my view, Indexicalism and the Heideggerian positions that inform it that are repressions of what is already in the process of becoming. While we should have a concern with ethical limits, those will be also recognized and derived through the use of full-fledged resources of our current language and its future elaborations. So these would be my polemical and final remarks. So thank you. Not sure if that works at all. Okay.
Well, thank you very much. I don't know, I think in my calculation, Chair, we have about 12 minutes. Could you?
Okay, I managed to save a little bit of time. Okay.
Could you stop sharing your screen if possible?
I did stop, right? I did stop.
I don't think so.
No?
No.
Weird.
Anyways.
So let me share again and stop sharing. This is sharing. Stop share.
Yes,
Okay.
Because maybe you have to change the view up here.
Yeah, okay. Oh, yeah, that's fine.
Right.
Sorry, I'm very confused. So we have about 12 minutes to for discussions before the next presentation. By the way, hello, Michel. How are you doing? Good to see you among us. So before Michel's talk, we have about 12 minutes. I don't know if anybody wants to say things. Again, as I said before, I've got my responses to JP in tonight's session. So
I changed a little bit. Are the responses still, on point? Because I changed a little bit. Sorry about that. From since Tuesday. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I'll start saying two things that I haven't, and then that can clarify things in general and to some people to some extent. I do see a difference between, first, I do see a difference between what I would call semantic indexicalism and metaphysical indexicalism. And I think this difference is something that is important for my work right now, because I am right now, as I mentioned before, proposing semantic indexicalism, which is an indexical view of propositions. And I want very much that it is possible, and I think it is, to endorse semantic indexicalism without a commitment to metaphysical indexicalism as proposed in the book. I think, for instance, just say something very brief, when in the three, four last paragraphs of the problem of essential indexical, John Perry talks about the implicit indexicality. He's very close. He's the closest one in sort of classical philosophy of language literature. I mean, in the 21st century, it's a bit different. I mean, there are people who are closer, and that's another issue. But he comes as close as classical philosophy of language gets from from semantical indexicalism. So I think there is a difference, and I think the point here in the book is really to go beyond that idea that when you think, let's put it this way, you think through something that is, in a sense, like a Kaplanian character, but is more than a Kaplanian character because it involves reference fixing. When you, in fact, metaphysical indexicalism goes further in the sense of saying that these are not only thought contents, but these are actually what are the things that are there to be thought of, right? So that's what I mean by the furniture of the universe being indexicalist. And the other very quick remark that I want to make is about something that it gets a bit, I don't mention in my response to you, but I notice in your presentation that sometimes it seems to me that you're not separating what is ostension and what is reference fixing in the...
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point, I think. It's not clear.
Of course, ostension is something that involves the act of like pointing at something through gestures. But the thing is that reference fixing is broader than that. And as your example shows, you can do it through descriptions. For instance, you can do it through a false description, right? You can say cats are animals, suppose cats are robots, or I can say, I don't know, my usual old example that is the first that always occurs to me. Somebody comes to you and say, Socrates is an Egyptian fact geographer, and the reference is fixed. Now, everything the person thinks about Socrates is wrong, but the reference is fixed. So fixation of reference can happen.
Okay, I see. Fixation of reference is independent of the truth of the description. That was clear enough. But also the reference can be false in a certain sense. Like, are you individuating Socrates if you think that? Like, you're not really individuating Socrates rightly, right? This is kind of a different level of false of.
Well, no. According to direct reference theories, which are like informing indexicalism, you get the reference is fully fixed by that. Now, I can be completely wrong, I mean, my representations, my beliefs can be completely wrong, and yet the reference is fixed. This is what Whiteheadian formulates in a slogan that is somehow confusing in some respects, but I think it makes the point quite quickly or quite smoothly, where he says, you can have linguistic contact without cognitive contact. Now, of course, I mean, the ambiguous part is cognitive contact, because, you know, cognition involves a lot of things, involves even the capacity to be in a language, etc. So we can formulate it in a maybe more precise way, saying that we can have linguistic contact without a representational contact, without contact through beliefs and knowledge. No, through beliefs, let's put it this way. Mm-hmm. So in a sense, the idea is precisely that, and this is where I think Kripke departs from Wittgenstein, and this is already naming a necessity, because basically that's the difference between a cluster theory and a direct theory of reference. So in a sense, yes, I believe that if you endorse any kind of descriptivism, then about reference, then I think the project of semantic indexicalism and ontological indexicalism wouldn't get off. So,
yeah, and then this is why we also uphold a certain interpretation of the disjunctivism in perception, right? Like the same move in the realm of perception. I see, like what I'm calling bypassing strategies, because you're bypassing the description in a certain sense. But the problem is Ilan, if it's about I don't know, anaphoric chains and this kind of thing, it's not about epistemic localization. I'm not sure how this squares with the rest of the project, like the thing of the metaphysics of others and this kind of thing, this grammar of borders between one and the other and this kind of thing, because indexicality is not really local, right? Like reference is fixed, and locality in the sense of epistemic locality is not preserved.
Well, basically, I don't think it's epistemic. I think this is what I think is the way out that is fashionable right now, with what I call, for lack of a better word, neo-Phrygians, to try to sort of say, in the end of the day, reference is going to be epistemic in one way or another. The move of indexicalism is to say that has to do with one's position independently of what you know or you fail to know, or you believe or you don't believe. So it's pretty much like external in that sense. It's not committed to any kind of is not committed to any kind of need to know anything. I can be somewhere, and this is where, you know, indexicals are important. For instance, I can say here now, I am here now, without, you know, and that's fine, because this is a truth of the logic of demonstratives. And this I don't need to know anything about where I am, etc., or anything, or even who I am, if you think of the classic amnesic.
But then in what sense does that aids the project of post-nihilism, for instance, against the extraction of intelligibility? This is kind of difficult.
This is going to be my reply, so I don't think, I mean, I use that most of the time, so yeah, I think well, wait a bit, and I hope to address it, maybe not sufficiently, but a little bit in my response.
Okay, that will be interesting.
Can I follow just a little quickly on, I mean, I think, you know, really this paper, and I agree with this, you know, very nicely brought up kind of like the tension between the kind of, and this is what the Wittgenstein quotes did so well, which I much appreciated. It's like, you know, tension between the indexical, or what might seem to be the indexical location, which seems in some way empiricist, versus like the surrounding of, you know, of practice, which Wittgenstein seems to insist like that has to be there in order for us to kind of meaningfully even, you know, have the place prepared to point. And I think, you know, one way, and this is really probably more a question for Hilan, it's like, you might sort of just, I mean, what you just said about kind of contextualism and some of the, you know, kind of more recent theories about context dependence, about the pragmatics of context dependence, might push us in the direction of saying, well, okay, it's all indexical, right? Even the practice, the surroundings are indexical in some respect. I'm not sure if you want to do that, or if you want to kind of go that far. So in other words, I mean, I think isn't there just a tension there between a kind of like empiricism, which seems implied, you know, by indexicalism itself, versus something that can't be given just empirically, namely this kind of practice surrounding, which comes, you know, from abstraction, or comes from work, or something, or something along those lines. And then, I mean, I think you could just say, oh, well, isn't, you know, Wittgenstein just a descriptivist? I don't think that's, I mean, I would argue against that. I would say, no, that's not.
Yeah,
that's not right.
Me too. Yeah.
But that's maybe a different argument. But
I think the question is for Ilan, right? Yeah.
Well, very quickly. Very quickly, as I said yesterday, I think we can think of, I mean, maybe a good guideline in this respect is to think in terms of replacement. So what I meant by replacement yesterday is that implicit indexicals would involve substantives. That is, every noun, could be understood in terms of implicit indexicals. That doesn't mean that everything that, for instance, we think, has to be indexical, because, for instance, you have the logic apparatus, you have all sorts of other things, and you have, like, for instance, our practices that are informed by the indexical, say, the indexical universe that surrounds us. But that doesn't mean that the practice themselves have to be fully characterized in terms of indexicals, if that sort of goes in the direction you had in mind, being very quickly.
Yeah, well, I think that then limits. I mean, at least it introduces a complication into the extent to which you can have a kind of unitary metaphysical indexicalism in view of the sorts of things that Jean-Pierre was pointing out.
Well, I mean, I think as far as metaphysics is concerned, you can say, for instance, to make it very brief, you can say there is a world out there of indexicals, right? And of course, we deal with it in different ways, and the way we deal depends on our practices, depends on, for instance, the way our capacities to do inferences and also, for instance, the logical alternatives that are available to us. But I mean, to remain in a kind of very kind of standard way of understanding the difference between our practices of knowledge, our epistemic practice on the one hand, and the world out there in the other. So I think, at least in this context, for instance, you can see that it is possible to hold on to a kind of thorough, kind of indexical image of things. Let's put it this way, of how things are.
Well, we can certainly continue this later. Shall I go ahead and anybody else questions or? Okay. So I'll go ahead and introduce Michel Weber, Director of the Center for Philosophical Practice in Brussels and Professor at the University of Saskatchewan. Talk titled Metaphysics Between Contradictions and Paradoxes, Some Whiteheadian Remarks. Can't hear you. I think you need to unmute. Still can't hear.
Unmute.
Yeah, I think you need to put your mic on.
But where is the mic?
To your left, usually there's a little button that says mute. You can.
If maybe you need to try to move your cursor to the bottom of the screen, because otherwise the icons may not even surface,
Oh, yeah.
may not even display. No,
Bottom left.
we cannot see it. Yes. There is also this message from Chris.
Does it work now?
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect, perfect,
Okay,
perfect.
well, sorry about that. It seems that with the mouse it wasn't working, but with the keyboard it did. Well, anyway, so welcome for this late exercise of applied schizophrenia. But I mean, communicating through technical devices is quite a tricky matter, and I suspect it's not really it's not efficient anyway. So what I'd like to do is to present some dimensions, some Whiteheadian's remark in order to contextualize the general what is at stake in metaphysics in general, and starting with the issue of philosophy, of course. So my talk won't really be that much theoretical. I mean, I've published about these issues, and it's unclear to me that it's needed to be technical as far as Whitehead is concerned. But on the other hand, what needs to be underlined, I would claim, is the practical dimension that philosophy has always had, which means first that philosophy has always had political dimension. Second, it has had a pedagogical dimension, meaning to communicate what has been discovered, so to speak, or the concepts that have been created, or the way culture has been modified by the philosopher. So political, pedagogical, and the third dimension would be therapeutical insofar as remember, well, it was especially clear, of course, with the pre-Socratics, and I'm thinking especially about Pythagoras. There was at the very beginning of the philosophical enterprise a clear understanding that philosophy not only had to contribute to the life of the city, but also to create a school of sorts in order to foster the wisdom or the path towards wisdom. And the third point being simply curing people, curing society. These are two dimensions that are intrinsically linked. Anyway, so what I'll do basically, first I'll say a word about why Whitehead, why should one bother about Whitehead, and then starting from this, I'll talk a bit about his difference between metaphysics and cosmology, the issue of ontologic, how does it work? How well the issue, the concept of logos, as you know, is very rich, and at its core you have the question of the correspondence, the adequacy that exists or does not exist between the logos that is at work within the world and the logos that is at work within human beings. And then the issue of logic and applicability. Maybe I'll say a word about ontology. How long do I have, by the way? It's 1909. When am I supposed to stop? If anyone's still there. In half an hour, perhaps, or something like that. Okay. Oui?
We're all here, yes.
Something like half an hour. Oui?
Something like half an hour, yes.
Okay, thanks. And then the real conclusion was already hinted insofar as the real conclusion, in order to sort out the puzzles, the philosophical puzzles, it seems to me, is always to go back to experience, which means that we have to remember that rationality as it is used in the normal state of consciousness, or the so-called normal state of consciousness, is a very specific tool that can be only to some extent enlarged in order to understand the complexity of our own experience and the complexity of the world. And as soon as one expands the horizon of our experience, and you don't need to go that far, because as you know, well, the very first step would be to define what the normal the normal state of consciousness is, of course. Well, let's rely upon common sense for the time being. But as soon as you consider that very often we are not in that normal state of consciousness simply because we are daydreaming, or because we are slumbering, or because we are dreaming full stop, or because of an intoxication, we have a completely different perspective on the world. All these different states that you might remember have been underlined first by William James, probably, and Whitehead has a very similar quote, or a very similar way of underlining the importance of radical experience, or radical empiricism. Sorry. So my point here, and here that would be sort of the conclusion, is that as soon as you expand your experiential horizon, then you realize, you contextualize differently, you relativize all the puzzles that are created by a use of reason that is very, let's say, very square. I don't know how to put it differently in English. Anyway, donc, let's say, so the very first thing I would like to say in 2 minutes is that philosophy, as I said it, is a matter of practice, or to put it in Greek, it's a matter of ascesis, of exercise. And from that perspective, it has definitely a very personal ring, which means that there is no a priori, I would say that there is no reason why one should choose one philosopher or one field of inquiry rather than another one. But of course, one soon realizes that there are differences in all the philosophers that one study or that one encounters during study, research, or whatever. There are differences of topic, of course, but differences of style as well, and basically differences of temperament. So in some cases, one is lured towards the study of one author rather than another. And it seems to me that it has a destinal dimension, if you like, insofar as you encounter an author or a book. It's like a person, actually. Sometimes you encounter the person too early, sometimes too late, whatever. But the argument for the relevance of Whitehead could be put simply in the following way, claiming that he is the postmodern Plato. So that would be an objective way, so to speak, of claiming that Whitehead has kept some relevance over the years. And what does it mean? What does it mean? Sorry, it means that he studied and taught and contributed to all the major sciences of his time, like Plato. And like Plato as well, he created a unified, more or less coherent, applicable worldview. But unlike Plato, he gave a positive status to the accident, the event, what Plato was calling the sumbe bekos. So for Plato, the event, or the yes, let's call it the event, the sumbe bekos, whatever, was not worthy of science. For Whitehead, one has to start from the event because everything is eventful. And so you have both the powerful context of a very broad cognitive horizon, or if you like, epistemological horizon, whatever. Well, Whitehead started with algebra, and he ended up with natural theology, as you might remember. And so you have that very broad mind and a complete postmodern standpoint, insofar as what matters here is to understand the event, or there are different ways of putting it, event becoming wait, but let's put it that way. It's simpler, because if we deal with other concepts, it won't be that straightforward. Anyway, bon, donc first thing would be to differentiate metaphysics and cosmology. And here it's quite simple and tricky at the same time, because Whitehead would claim that metaphysics deals with necessity, with the core of with the laws that work for all possible universe, laws or concepts, categories, rather. So the idea is that one cannot conceive a state of affair that would not exemplify these first principles. So, but how can we reach these laws, these principles that all question of arche, as the Greek would say? You have to start basically from the contingent, and contingencies is the field of cosmology. So when we deal with cosmology, and he claims that Process and Reality is an essay in cosmology, as far as I remember. When we deal with cosmology, we are dealing with what he would call, what he has called, sorry, or cosmic epoch. So cosmic epoch, basically, it means that there are contingencies, such like the speed of light, such like the gravitational constant G, or the Planck constant, etc., etc. The fact that they are conscious observers, and so we can, from cosmology, we can to some extent extract necessary concepts. But when you look at what he does in Process and Reality in the very first part of the book, since he claims to provide a categorical scheme that would be exhaustive, that would be complete, if you like, that would be coherent and applicable, it's very difficult to define what is exactly metaphysical and what is exactly cosmological. Because, for instance, his category of the ultimate tries to name what creativity involves. So it's quite difficult to understand what would be a universe without creativity. A universe without creativity would be a completely static universe. But does it really mean that it would be completely impossible to have a so-called universe that would be completely static without any form of becoming, only some form of Parmenidean sphere, if you like? Or if you have such a universe, but with only things, items within it that are transforming, morphing into each other, that wouldn't be a Whiteheadian universe at all, but it would be possible as well. So the difference between metaphysics and cosmology is essential, it seems to Whitehead, but at the same time, you can see that it's quite difficult to make the difference unless you claim or you point at the fact, like I've done a minute or two ago, and like did Eddington in the 20s, etc., that you have some purely physical data, or what has been called the large number hypothesis, that deals with the idea that you have correlations between the micro world and the macro world, if you like, and that these correlations seems to point at a very fine tuning, allowing the existence of observers. So unless you deal with more physical issues, if you like, from that difference is not easy to identify in Whitehead's work or anywhere. Anyway, he also talks about speculative philosophy that would be the global field of philosophy, insofar as it deals not only with the metaphysical issues, but also the cosmological ones, and everything that is more directly linked with the existence of, with our existence. Now, so this was a very general set of remarks. Now, more to the point, that's the section I named earlier. I suppose you've seen perhaps the draft someplace. The question of ontologic. So what is the question of ontologic? It's the issue, as I said, of naming the correspondence that exists, that doesn't exist, that is strict or loose between the reason, the logos of the observer, and the rationality of the universe. So now Whitehead underlines more than once that logic presupposes metaphysics. You see, it's you need to clarify your metaphysical standpoint before you can solve purely logical conundrums. So so logic presupposes metaphysics, but he says the exact same with regard to epistemological difficulties. If you don't clarify the issue of ontology, if you don't clarify the very first principles that seem to you to define your relationship with the world, then you're stuck with, well, contradictions and paradoxes, basically. It will be my next point. So here I simply remind you of three basic options, historical options. The first one is the concept of cosmos, which basically means that you have a closed world that is defined by a strict order, a hierarchy of laws, one single logos, and everything that actually is not readable through the logos is ignored. It is the case, of course, that you always have indeterminacies and I forgot the word now, things that do not match pure reason, but then philosophy has quite often ignored these reality or considered that they were low order reality or that they were linked simply with blind necessity. The concept of matter, of course, has been often used in order to name it, and so forth and so on. So the first way of understanding that correspondence that exists or does not exist between our reason and the reason of the world is the concept of cosmos. Then its opposite is chaos, of course. It means that reality is fully unintelligible, that our reason cannot in any way make sense of what is happening. This is clearly not the case, at least in the normal state of consciousness. And then the third concept that has had quite that is quite renowned, especially since Deleuze used it in the 60s, I suppose, but it's coming from Joyce in the 30s, is chaosmos. Alors, chaosmos, it's an interesting way of pointing at the fact that there is both a chaotic and a cosmotic, it doesn't work, a cosmological way, a cosmological dimension to our world. It basically means that you can understand the apparent stability of the world as the surface effect of deeper processes of transformation, morphing, becoming. There are different ways of understanding this. And so the way I've put it is important, because the idea here is to consider that change, or to put it with a better concept, becoming is at the core. And so if you have some stability, it will be a surface effect, if you like. It's not the old way of understanding change. That would be the opposite, with the idea that there is a stable core and that it's only accidental that you have changes. Now, with regard to that connection that exists, that is loose, not loose, between our reason and the reason of the world, we can distinguish coherence and consistency. This is what Whitehead does right at the beginning of Process and Reality. And so he points at the fact that what is important is the coherence of the categories that are being used, which basically means, that he argues for some form of categorical democracy. What is a democracy when you deal with categories? It's simply the fact that each category in itself contributes some meaning to the system, and yet it has no power or no semantic power, if you like, outside of the network in which it is activated. So each category has to have a power in itself, and yet it's only the network that makes sense. And so Whitehead claims that coherence is the most important thing, and to the example that he uses is Descartes. He says that if you want to have an idea of the most incoherent metaphysics, just have a look at Descartes, that defines two types of substances that are by definition completely foreign to each other. This is not a contradiction, this is an incoherence. And then, of course, if you define two substances that are completely foreign to each other, that are not really linked, the only way of taking into account our actual experience on the one hand, and to fix that incoherence, is to appeal to a third concept or category, it would be God, of course. And it's a very old story, as you might have understood, in philosophy, to appeal to God in order to fix the incoherences of some categorical scheme. So what Whitehead says here is that coherence is the major issue, because a problem in consistency or contradiction is the most gratuitous of error, he says. You can fix it very, very simply. There is no need to worry about these small contradictions. And indeed, if you read Whitehead or other authors, I won't name anyone, and it's full of contradictions, but it's not a catastrophe insofar as you can identify the coherence of the vision as it is embodied in the main categories. So to define contradiction or non-contradiction, you can use, Aristotle talked about it, of course, Leibniz, Boole, etc., etc. It's the idea that no statement can be both true and false at the same time with regard to the same reality. It's fairly simple. And if you have a contradiction, you can it's easy to identify, it's easy to fix. It's not really it's not a deep epistemological or philosophical problem. Now, paradox, on the contrary, and this is of course the main point that has to be made. Paradox is a completely different matter, because it will bankrupt choice itself. It makes you unable to define its real status. Now, of course, there are ways of avoiding this, because you have the logico-mathematical paradoxes, and Whitehead has worked on that issue with Russell, of course. It's the idea of the logical types, etc. And then you have the semantical paradoxes, like the Epimenide. Somebody who says, I am lying. Well, what does it mean? Is that person really lying? In that case, what he says is true? Or is that person not lying? In that case, it's false. Well, you know the stuff. But what is really interesting, and here I'm following Václavík. You might know Václavík, who was who tried to sort out the relevance of bits in the 80s, I suppose, I don't remember, who makes that difference between logico-mathematical paradoxes, semantical paradoxes, and pragmatic paradoxes that deal with paradoxical injunctions like be spontaneous, or I want you to be free, or I want you to dominate me, or whatever. These paradoxes can ruin the interaction between individuals in everyday life, but that they can also be used within a therapeutical context in order to try to make people overcome their whatever stuck in their mind, whatever is stuck in their existence. So you have there is a very tricky status that can be given to paradoxes. And actually, for those of you who might have read a bit of Whitehead, within his framework, when he deals with the issue of the role of God in the world, he's talking about something that is called the initial subjective aim, and it's really tricky to understand how that aim will work, because if God is really providing the best possible aim for an actual event, let's say, to make it the simplest, so to talk about human experience in the life of somebody, if God is really providing the best possible choice, the best possible option, how can one really refuse that option? First question. And second question, what does freedom mean? Huh? So if you understand that initial subjective aim in the same way I've just talked about paradoxical injunctions within a therapeutical framework, then you can understand that God could talk like with paradoxes, let's put it that way, and hence lure the subject that would keep freedom nevertheless. You see, so it's a very tricky issue. But here, the point that I want to make, or the stuff that I'd like to underline, is that with paradoxes, and with especially these pragmatic paradoxes, you have some use of reason that lures you toward something that is after reasons, something that is really completely concrete, something that deals with freedom itself, hence something that deals with the meaning of our own lives, what we can do or not do with our contingencies, So here, the link, I see that it's 33 on my clock, so I suppose I need to wrap it up somehow. So here, the link with what I said at the beginning. So what I said at the beginning was that what matters for philosophy is to deal with experience, of course, to start from concrete experience, but also to deal, and especially to deal with all experiences, and not only experiences that are, sorry, it's a mosquito, not only experiences that define the normal state of consciousness. And these experiences basically would be what one, it's Sherrington in 1908, I think, what one called exteroception, which means the senses that are feeding us with data coming from the external world, the five senses. We have more than five senses. It's called interoception and proprioception. Anyway, and out of these five senses, as you know, it's the analysis of Jonas and Whitehead as well, by the way. Out of these five senses, the one that is the most important for Western philosophy is sight. So if as soon as you consider, as soon as you broaden your perceptual horizon, as soon as you take into account, Bergson did it as well, for instance, as soon as you take it into, into account more types of perception, or even donc out of the five external senses, but also dealing with our visceral prehensions, if you like, and eventually you can raise the question of altered states of consciousness. Well, as soon as you broaden your perceptual horizon, as soon as the issue of consciousness becomes richer, if you like, eh bien, all the philosophical conundrums are completely relativized, or perhaps even are dissolved in experience. So William James, when he dealt with radical empiricism, he framed the concept of pure experience. Pure experience would be an experience in which the difference between the subject and the object is not necessary, if I'm not experienced anymore, if you like. So in such a case, you end up, I suppose, either with the complete bliss of pacification, or the hell that can be attributed to the feeling of the perception of everything that is linked with with the ego. But in both cases, the issue, the philosophical issues, the question of especially of consistency or contradiction and of coherence do not matter anymore. And so the relevance of paradoxes for philosophy, it seems to me, or a very broad way of putting it, is to use them, to understand them as a way of overcoming local contradictions and of luring us towards the concrete experience. And especially perhaps, well, depending on the context and depending on the author and the way it is used, trying to lure us towards the same vision as the author's vision, because as you know, this was the metaphor of Bergson, saying that the author has always one vision, and that vision actually remains the same. Well, it's changing a bit, but basically an author has spoken, he says, his entire life in order to say the exact same stuff. But but of course, when you say it, you add differences and specificities that were not present in the first place. Anyway, so I think that's more or less what I wanted to the little details, so to speak, that I wanted to propose to you. I suppose that I could stop here. I see it's 39. It's more or less half an hour, wasn't it? What do you reckon? Okay. Bon, ben voilà. I'm lucky enough to hear myself, but nobody else. So revenge.
Well, thank you very much, Michel.
Oui, bref. Have I kept everyone alive or not, or basically whatever?
Yeah. So,
Yes.
well, I mean, Chair, I think there's a question by Chris, and I think we should move on to John soon, so that we can have a break between this session and the next.
So, a quick question and a quick observation. The first observation is, especially with your final comments regarding the function of contradiction as the encounter with paradox as allowing for a lure back to the concrete, I couldn't help but notice the similarities between this notion and the sentiments of Miguel de Unamuno when he talks about his encounter with failed proofs of God, and he holds that all proofs of God in some sense are failures, but he locates the motivation to continue examining life, to continue trying to find connections that might lead to a justification for consciousness, not in any successful proof, but rather in what he calls the ya no, the not yet, that he finds every time the proof fails. In this way, it's similar to Jose Revueltas would also say about Hegel: every time I read Hegel, I find that he's correct, and every time I find that Hegel's correct, I have to vomit. So there's the notion that in encountering the failure of a notion, we're nevertheless propelled beyond that notion. And so I wondered, this leads to my question, in my interactions with Raimon Panikkar, he seems to be doing something, maybe the inverse of what Whitehead is proposing. My Whitehead's not good enough to know. But when you talked about this notion of a surface tension that conceals an ongoing change, which in some sense it belies an appearance of stability. What Panikkar will suggest is that we have abandoned in some sense what he wants to call cosmology with a K, which is a terribly inconvenient Derridian move, in favor of a cosmology which has so delimited what the phenomena that it observes that it's no longer interested in what he'll refer to as the all. So for him, this cosmology with a K would take into account two facts. One, that what we should be interested in philosophy and theology for that matter, is everything there is, and moreover, the impossibility of that all to be what it purports to be. But also, in some sense, it should recognize that any attempt to pursue that kind of knowledge departs from what he calls a muthos or a mythos, which is always in place, but could be different. So there's any number of mythoi that we might adopt as a starting point. And yet the muthos is itself almost a form of surface tension, like you mentioned. It stabilizes an image. It allows for inquiry. It even allows for relationships and correlations to be established. But once the surface is touched, it shatters that muthos and can only give rise to other muthoi. And he would furthermore argue that the issue with cosmology is that it's adopted empirical science as an exhaustive muthos, which is supposed to prohibit the adoption of any other kind of muthos. So I wondered if you see any correlations between that notion of a standpoint that's provisionally adopted and yet treated as absolute, what you also referred to as necessary truths that arise from contingent circumstances, and the kind of surface tension that you were referring to in Whitehead and in your paper as well.
Wow. Bon, that's a long question. Now, with regard, just a detail, with regard to understanding Hegel and vomiting, James has claimed that he understood Hegel after using nitrous oxide, as you might know. There is a very famous passage. If you write to me, I can find it back to you. And it's interesting because a little parenthesis. Whitehead and James basically, I would say, have exactly the same vision, and yet James has sort of specialized in all sorts of intoxication, whereas Whitehead was teetotal. So they have reached the same vision, so to speak, whereas one was dealing with bare, brutal experience and the other purely imagination. Now, Panicard, I don't know Panicard very well. I don't, maybe I've met him one day, I'm not sure. He has been interested in Whitehead. I think that he was or used to be a Catholic priest. He was specialized in Hinduism as well. So it's loads of different things. Now, the issue here, I would look at it from a purely pragmatic perspective. You deal with a set of categories. You frame them, as Whitehead says, in a way that they are coherent. Don't worry about the possible contradictions, but create a framework that is really coherent and use it as a tool. See how it works. That's the difference Whitehead makes between applicability and adequation. It's the very first page of Process and Reality, I think. And what he means, I think, is that your framework has to be coherent, of course. But if it is of no use, no actual use, if it has no application, then it remains a pure futile, if you like. And so you have to use it. The image he uses actually is the image of the flight of the aeroplane, which means that you, out of the concrete experience, you extract concepts, you purify it, so to speak, in order to make it, well, like a light. Huh? And then you go back to experience and see if it has some use, some applicability. So it's like the aeroplane that starts and lands. And I suppose that if it helps, you could make the claim that it's fully adequate, that it is your mythos you were alluding to. If it helps you, it could be one way of dealing with the issue of freedom, for instance. Let's say that I'm free because I've just decided that I was free. Huh? No, but it's a very important point. I mean, going back to James, he sort of could abandon his state of despair after reading Ravesson or something like that, or at the very least, considering himself being free and free to live and decided to live, if you like. So the power of ideas has to be underlined once again. So here, I'm not sure that I'm answering your question, because talking about mythos, of course, has also a historical root, because if you look at the pre-Socratics, but the concepts of the pre-Socratics, or what we understand of the pre-Socratics, have had a very long legacy. And if you look at the first concepts that have been proposed by the pre-Socratics, you can trace them in Homer, you can trace them in mythology, and you can understand that the emergence of philosophy, the historical emergence of philosophy, is of course directly linked with a new political system, of course, but also the fact that what used to be attributed to gods is now attributed to nature itself. It's voilà. Donc, I don't know if I have. Anyway, I made you smile. So.
C'était une réponse parfaite. Je vous remercie.
Ah, ben voilà. Alléluia, alléluia, comme on disait. Bon. Is that it? I've cured all epistemological indeterminations. Very well, very well. But with that regard, so I can add, I can repeat what I said earlier. So it's quite amazing to see or to read Whitehead, who used to be basically an algebraist logician, if you like, claiming that you have to make ontological claims in order to sort out the difficulties in logic, but also in epistemology. And it's basically the reason why, I suppose, the reason of the development of his own philosophy, who was first logico-mathematical, if you like, but always with, I would claim, with that idea of saying something about the world as it stands, and then he dealt with philosophy of science, philosophy of nature, and epistemological problems, and ended up accepting, so to speak, to cross the gates of philosophy, of ontology, sorry, in order to define once and for all the conditions of possibility of logic itself. And all this, of course, should be understood from the broader perspective of what has been called the biological theory of knowledge, or something like that. You can find it in Piaget, Piaget, but Čapek, especially Čapek, actually, which means that the categories that we are using, they're rooted not only in a long biological evolution, but also in everyone's growth. As you know, that would be Piaget's work. As you know, the categories that we use change with the age. And the third point would be, I suppose, Bateson would be the relevant author here, would be to understand that the categories that we use are not only rooted in that old biological evolution, in that personal evolution, but also rooted in a given culture defined at its root by a specific language cutting out, chopping out of the flux, if you like, defining items, things, or even events. The library you have behind you, for instance, if you show it, for the virtual library, of course, whatever, if you show it to a very young child, I surmise that child will see only patches of color, will never imagine that these are different items. But if you pull out a book in front of that child, that tiens, interesting, and then it's the end of your library, of course. But you see, with that gesture, that would receive a name, of a verb. You've pulled the book, and it's the book. You cut out reality in a very specific, in one way that wouldn't be done elsewhere. Sapir, Worf, etc. All these discussions have been raised by within the philosophy of language, and it's completely fascinating indeed, because it's the cultural dimension, if you understand it on the top of the developmental dimension, which itself is anchored in a very old history. That is completely essential to understand from a process perspective, since it makes us inhabitants of the world. It's an old issue that has been tricky within philosophy. Okay, I think I've got here some message saying that voilà, that's it. Eh bien, thank you for your attention. Voilà. It will be the time for my pipe, I suppose.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And let's go ahead and proceed. It's my pleasure to introduce John Bova, University of New Mexico, and the new Center for Research and Practice. His talk is titled From the Essential Indexical to the Existential Indexical.
Okay, hi. Can everyone hear me? Okay.
Yes.
I'm going to attempt to do a screen share here in a moment too, which is way beyond my usual capacities. I'm going to apologize in advance because really what I'm going to present is a series of fragments from a project that has kept growing without bounds. It started just as marginalia to Huan's book, and now is morphing into an engagement with both the literature on the essential indexical and a variant of Lacanian literature coming out of the Cahiers pour Analyse group. So I'll say a few things, and please bear with me. I'm going to attempt to share the screen. Okay, did that work?
Yes, it did work, yes.
So right now, the title is Misquotationalism and the Existential Indexical. It has been altered from the essential indexical to the existential indexical, which was altered from the existential indexical. As you see, it keeps morphing under my hand right now. At any rate, trying to get it to move. Okay. At any rate, there are three terms here that can be used as a mnemonic for the dialectic that I want to suggest. First, misquotationalism. Misquotationalism is a name, I think a good name, a pretty stable name for a structure that I want to suggest, following Lacan and the Cahiers group, is at the heart of the subject in general. The subject who says I, the apparently essentially indexical subject. Namely, as a general matter, the subject self-attributes a perspective to itself in an apparently essentially indexical fashion when it identifies a propositional attitude, P, that it holds, with the quotation of P. The subject is thereby reproduced or represented to the following signifier. When I say that it identifies the two, that would be a sort of positive misquotationalism. But in fact, I think probably a lack of distinction suffices, because distinguishing P from quote P isn't possible except in relation to a system of quotation and disquotation, right? So if we regard the distinction as something that actually has to take place and can be absent, then we get, I think, something that's even closer to the slippery truth about essential indexicality, namely that a simple lack of a distinction may do the work of producing something that appears to be a paradox. Here's an informal statement of misquotationalism that might have been a little opaque. No human being, and probably no other finite system that uses something like a language, no human being can keep count of levels of quotation and disquotation more than a few iterations in without the aid of symbolic writing. What the subject does not realize in general is that in contemplating this fact, it contemplates its own being. The existential indexical, second term here, is two-sided. I should actually have included that there. It's two-sided. It's the condition that the subject is in on account of misquotation in general, and that's the general status of the subject, I'm suggesting, and it's also an exception to that structure. This sounds like a paradox, but it isn't. The third term, diagonalization here, is what's going to provide the relation between the two, or if you like, the relation between the two sides of the existential indexical. The side of it that is self-misquoting, and the side that is a veridical exception to that general system of self-misquoting. This is just my version of méconnaissance with a Wittgensteinian inflection. To divide the indexicality of the subject into, on the one hand, the structure of an error or miscognition, misrecognition, méconnaissance, and on the other, the punctual emergence of a proper exception to this misrecognition violates, I think, the letter and the spirit of indexicalism. So I can only hope to shed oblique light on Hilan's book by speaking into, and I hope across, this divide over indexicality. Clearly, I rely on his hospitality towards such an improper guest. I won't say a disruptive guest, because that would actually presuppose success, and I don't think that should go without saying. So we have to get the structure of misquotation right before we can talk about the exception. I would emphasize that we have little idea of how to sort out a logic of exception without falling back on preconceived notions, unless we work through diagonalization. So again, that's our third mnemonic. Diagonalization here is the metalogical form that explains the relation between the two other terms, between structure and exception, and in so doing produces the exception, because the exception is going to be the witness to the general méconnaissance of the subject. On this view, the essential indexical is a miscount, first to be eliminated in a new orientation to a correct count, and the existential indexical is this fact in the form of an unexpected return of an indexical-like structure no longer centered on the subject, which is the very witness of the elimination of the essential indexical. The first two names are neologisms. If they've been used elsewhere, please tell me, and I apologize and will credit. You would really think that misquotationalism would already have been used, but I can't find an instance. There's a very interesting paper that I'll cite in the print version that develops higher order thought theory as a theory of consciousness into a zone called quotationalism. And I want to build on that and take it one step farther from quotationalism to misquotationalism. Diagonalization, on the other hand, is a perfectly sober and well-established intramathematical name. Sometimes there are misunderstandings about it with regard to scope. I'm going to use it for the common form of the diagonal theorems as a whole, as wholes, particularly with respect to Cantor's theorem. Some people use it only for a particular step in those theorems, namely the collapse of a two-dimensional relation on the diagonal into a one-dimensional predicate. I'd probably still call it a relation. Now, I acknowledge at the outset that the essential indexical and metaphysical indexicalism are not identical. Hillon's indexicalism gathers together many more threads than can be reduced to a simple defense of the essential indexical. In fact, it's already an act of interpretation, possibly a misinterpretation, to attribute a necessary commitment to essential indexicalism to the book Indexicalism at all, even if what were said in the book captures all of what Hillon is saying to us, which a priori, following Levinas, it cannot. But it is plausible, I think, that indexicalism includes, therefore implies, a commitment to the essential ineliminable indexical. I hope this is not totally a misrepresentation. It's the point at which I can enter into a conversation with the book, short of a direct re-engagement with Levinas, for which I'm not ready. So here's how the dialectic of indexicality as a whole works, and you can see how this project has grown tentacles that are somewhat beyond my ability to control right now. I will point to a few places in this dialectic in this talk, and I hope to cut down the number of transitions in the published version. I do take the argument that I'm offering to be dialectical in the sense of Platonic dialectical, which is to say, did something happen? The screen is telling me that something changed. People can see something or not see something that they couldn't before. Okay. Thank you, Chris, for the thumbs up.
You're good.
Platonic dialectical in the sense that concepts transform into other concepts, particularly by means of their relationship with mathematics. So you'll notice that a number of the middle terms here have to do with number. The essential indexical will be transformed into extensionalism by means of attention to the role of number in constituting what appears to be an essential indexical. Later, the role of the miscount is going to be essential, as I already telegraphed, in establishing misquotationalism. Then in the transition from a local contingent méconnaissance to a systematic one, again, number is going to play a role in this time counting the levels of quotation and disquotation, or said theoretically, trying to keep track of types. And then the final irony of misquotationalism, its transformation into a local exception to itself without paradox, is going to take place by means of diagonalization, which the mathematical form of which we'll talk about. So you see that I do want to get from the essential indexical at the beginning to the existential indexical at the end, as in the announced version. And as so often, it's the last transition that's so important, but it seems to require the others. So I'll do my best to drop in to the dialectic in a number of points to try to show its trajectory. I don't want to give too much background here, but I do want to say that it's useful to approach philosophy as a competing set of positions on relation and self-relation. It's extremely important to consider this in classical Greek, Indian, and Chinese philosophy, but I'm going to pass over that here entirely, and I'll mention only 3 interconnected modern cases. Well, 4 counting Hegel. Hegel's project in the phenomenology, recapitulated in a different way in the logic, was first to depart from indexicality as the lowest level of experience, I here now, in order to force experience to become knowledge, but in the end to reconcile the two in the form of an absolute knowing in and for itself. That is, a being which is exactly what it is of and is of exactly what it is. An essentially indexical knowledge. In quite self-conscious reaction to Hegel, we get the 3 main strands of 20th century philosophy, all of which define themselves, as I see it, in relation to this issue. So analytic philosophy constituted itself quite explicitly against British Hegelianism on the affirmation of the reality of non-indexical, or what were called external, which is to say extensional relations. Frege and Russell in particular emphasize that such relations cannot be reduced to properties of substances. Phenomenology, on the other hand, sought to get back behind the problem of Hegelian synthesis of indexicals and knowledge by founding external relations of concepts and objects upon internal relations of experience. The privileged internal relations for phenomenology are clearly indexicals. Just think of Dasein being it's there. And think of the spatiality of the world, for instance, in Division 1 of Being and Time, being founded upon the spatiality, the indexical spatiality of Dasein. Thirdly, and of course, all of this requires much more discussion. But I'm going to keep going anyway. Negative dialectic finally kept the Hegelian scheme, but attempted to find a principle which would elucidate the lack of synthesis between the two. At times eschewing logic altogether, at times having recourse to Husserl, at times to Frege. The latter, recourse to Frege, was the path of the Cahiers pour Analyse group, whose work is the major inspiration for this project. Okay. Oops. Let's talk for a moment about defining indexicalism. I'm not always able to determine what the text is defining indexicalism in differentiation from. Substantives is the most common answer in the book, I think. Quote, indexicalism is the claim that absolutes are dectic. They are like such words as there, out, beyond, different. There is no underlying substantive reality to clarify indexicals. Dexis reaches bedrock. Sorry, those quotes are straddled across 2 different pages. All right, so not substantives. I can think of 2 main ways of taking substantives here. First, we might be thinking of a thought of substances in the sense of Aristotelian substance, or a sense derived from Aristotelian substance, as Harman described object-oriented ontology yesterday. If that's what's meant, then I'm entirely with Ben Susan. Substance in that sense, supposedly prior to relation, is, I think, a harmful illusion, and I don't see a need for it. Things can be coarse-grained constructions out of events. I think we're close to Whitehead here. Even, especially, when the thing includes part of the selecting mechanism itself, only ever a part of it, I think. In this sense, everything would participate in méconnaissance to the extent that it has the ability to reproduce moment by moment. If we anthropomorphized it, we could say that the thing tries to identify itself with the structural form that it approximates and only ever approximately succeeds. There's no time here to go really into the relation between things and forms, but I will be making constant use of the difference, and I hope that will begin to show a bit of how I take the difference to be. I'll mention in passing in the text, sometimes substances are equated with universals. On this, all I can say briefly is that the term seems to me ambiguous. Universals. It depends. On the theoretical side, Aristotelian genera and species, so no, those go out with substances. Universals in the sense of forms in which participation is possible, yes. On the ethical side, the Hegelian imperialist state, in which a contingent culture is promoted to the level of a concrete universal, absolutely not. The Kantian cosmopolitan universal, applying to all rational beings and based not on culture, but on the interruption of culture, as I say it, yes. But I would note that rescuing Kant's universal by his own criteria depends on discovering the true form of self-reference in order that the moral law might have its form as its content and nothing else. The promise of the categorical imperative depends on making sure that we're really right about the form of self-reference. And I claim that we don't get the true form of self-reference before diagonalization. Enough about universals. So the universals are somewhat in parentheses. So we had substance, but I think Hillon also means to reject a Phrygian inquiry into the relation between intentions, say for the moment concepts, but for Frege are functions, and extensions or multiplicities. And to reject that in favor, particularly of a phenomenological grounding of both of those terms and their relation on indexical states or acts. For indexicalism, I think an extensional dyadic relation, we'll write it phi of A comma B, between two terms, and I'm sorry, that didn't get copied to the slide, is always founded on a prior form of relation, which is, let's say, quasi-monadic. B not in relation to A, but B from the point of view of A, which we'll call phi star of B, where phi star, to speak critically, this is my view, is simultaneously dyadic in that it is relational, and the relation is not identity, and monadic, in that there is no other relatum there. If I'm right that expressions like this are, in general, ultimately illusions, then the natural error theory is given by focusing on what would be the middle term between those two expressions, namely an indexing, in which the dyadic relation phi of AB is schematized, or curried, as the computer scientists say, to the monadic function that happens to be identified by a term that need not be one of its explicit arguments. So then we have phi sub A of B, which is to say the phi indexed by A of B. So there we make use of A first in order to identify a function which is then applied to B. By this trick, A and B are removed from the simultaneity of an extensional relation. And subsequent to that, it's easy to forget at the moment of applying phi to B that A ever needed to be explicitly mentioned at all. As I think in indexicalism, multiplicity needs to be founded on a standing location or point of view. So by currying, we get a nice linear signifying chain in which the indexical subject, I think, can be instantiated. I equate currying here with Kant's schematism because it does the essential work of Kant's schematism, namely reducing simultaneous multiplicity to temporal order. As an aside, there's an alternative path to indexing, I think, which is very different, namely finding a structure in which the terms and the relations of the structure can be synthetically identified with each other without remainder. But this is a very special case. The paradigms here are algebraic structures, particularly groups, I think, which I think of groups as having special rank among forms. Sometimes I've been tempted to say that groups are eidetic numbers. But at any rate, this alternative path to indexing does not apply directly to existence, to things or events. And regardless, there's no time to develop it here. Now, perhaps Hilon would be willing to go with me on the first step, namely setting being indexical equivalent to being indexed. On page 16, indeed, we have the valuable suggestion, well, it's valuable to me, that the meaning of indexicalism is that, quote, to be is to be indexed. But I'm not sure that taking what for me would be the attractive view, the attractive route of conceding that indexicals are founded on actual indexing is compatible with indexicalism, the metaphysical view, the view that to be is to be indexed. For, given a curried function, we can always uncurry that function into the explicit relation phi of A comma B. The question is whether in general we can go the other way, whether we can always curry a relation. In general, that is, lacking a very specific configuration outside of algebraic structure in which the move from a dyadic to a monadic predicate is not just licit, but inevitable. We'll get that in diagonalization. But we'll also get, by that very fact, that currying is not possible in general. There is an excess of relations over indexicalizable functions, over functions that can be indexed. There are more relations than there are relations that can be indexed. Now, it ought to be possible, I think, always to curry relations, that is to reduce them to indexed functions if indexicalism is true, I think, and if being is being indexed. On the other hand, if indexicals are tacit indices of relations, and relations cannot always or in general be indexed, then to be is not to be indexed, and indexicalism must be given up. On pain of losing, I think, the very relation to a richness of relationality that indexicalism is ontologically and ethically motivated by the prospect of securing. I said that badly, but what I mean is I think indexicalism is motivated by the idea that we're going to get things more relational by identifying being with being indexed. And if I'm right, there's an irony to this. Being indexed actually constrains, identifying being with being indexed actually dramatically constrains the relations that are available to us to think and to recognize. So if we can agree that indexicals are tacit indices, then the indexicalist and the middle logician might have a common frame of reference in terms of which to examine the indexicalist thesis, and my work would be made precise. All that I have to show via diagonalization is precisely that relational being exceeds being indexed, not because of the withdrawal of some substance, heaven forbid, but because the non-existence of substance and the freeing of relation implies that most relations cannot be indexed. But this consequence should be unacceptable to the indexicalist, I think. So I will suppose that given the choice, they will wish to withdraw agreement to the premise that indexicality is tacit indexing, and insist instead on upholding the essential indexical, one which cannot be unpacked or decoded into any extensional relation, however infinite. And if this is the move, then the indexicalist must be allowed to do so that the argument has its best chance to go forward. But this commits us to a longer way around. We have to then examine the motivations for accepting or refusing the equation of indexicality with indexing. And to me, these do indeed seem very different. I don't think it's possible to equate the essential indexical with indexing. Essential indexicals seem to me rather to rely on suppressing exactly indices, while indexing is an extensional relation. As soon as we're allowed to talk about indices, it seems to me, we're beginning to break the spell of the essential indexical. To the contrary, the essential indexical preserves the relationality of indexing while suppressing one of the relata. The result, I think, is a paradoxical property, such as there-ness ascribed to a relatum, and as long as it is impossible to get out of my own point of view, as indexicalism seems to imply, I can only attribute this paradoxical property of there-ness to the other relatum. I have no idea when I started. How am I doing on time?
I think we're actually past the official end time, but we can go a bit longer, right, Elon? Or
okay.
I think for the session you have more 20. I think for the session you have more 20.
Let me just give a very brief tour then of the field that I've been working in. I think there is some evidence in the text. Sorry. I think there is some evidence in the text that the indexicalist will wind up turning to the essential indexical. So I wanted to actually recollect the classic statements of essential indexicality. I was a bit surprised that we haven't so far, but at least before the final discussion, it would be cool to have that on the table. So from John Perry, I know this is quite familiar, but I think it also suffers from over-familiarity. I'll see if I can do something to slightly defamiliarize it. Anyway, John Perry, the famous anecdote. I once followed a trail of sugar on a supermarket floor, pushing my cart down the aisle on one side of a tall counter and back the aisle on the other, seeking the shopper with the torn sack to tell him he was making a mess. With each trip around the counter, the trail became thicker, but I seemed unable to catch up. Finally, it dawned on me. I was the shopper I was trying to catch. And Perry's first step in interpreting this. I believed at the outset that the shopper with a torn sack would seem to be the kind of description that Hilon agrees, I think, doesn't capture essentially indexical content. The shopper with the torn sack. With each trip around the counter, I believed at the outset that the shopper with the torn sack was making a mess, and I was right. But I did not believe that I was making a mess. That seems to be something I came to believe. And when I came to believe that, I stopped following the trail around the counter and rearranged the torn sack in my cart. My change in beliefs seems to explain my change in behavior. As a number of eminent scholars have noticed, the grandparent of the essential indexical must be considered Winnie the Pooh. We know that anecdote as well. Winnie the Pooh is in pursuit of a creature known as a woozle. Piglet joins him on the hunt, and they find to their great dismay that as they pursue the woozles, the number of woozles keeps increasing. The overlap in details is amusing to me. We have self-misrecognition through circular motion, and we have a white powder, be it sugar or snow, that makes the repetition of the unary trait legible, makes repetition legible as an accumulation. And then we have the sudden illumination. I don't know whether anyone has taken the anecdote seriously enough to contrast them. Perhaps they're embarrassed to do so. But I'll make a fool of myself. The Pooh anecdote explicitly includes a better explanation for the indexical realization, because in it, our attention is called to the fact that the tracks keep growing, not in some vague magnitude, but in number, from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, from n to the successor of n. From n to what will have become n plus 1, once that iteration is recognized at the level of number. So in that act of recognition, which is supposed to be irreducibly indexical, we also have another operation going on, right? We have the repetition of the unary trait becoming recognized reflectively as number. And it's this that has the character of breaking a mindless succession by becoming aware, not simply of myself, but of this count. Without number, I claim, we have no eureka moment here. If the lines did not accumulate, after all, why should Perry conclude that he himself is the spiller? He would likely never realize it, but at least he would not realize it solely on the basis of the narrated circumstances, and rightly so. If the trait stops repeating, even if Perry was the spiller at the first or second rotation, he will presumably not come to realize that. Perhaps the sugar has settled in the bag. Perhaps it's all spilled out. Then Perry ought to become all the more convinced that it's someone else who is leaving the trail, as the count no longer tracks his own movements. Then we have the volume of the sugar, right? Yeah, I already mentioned it. Perhaps it's all spilled out. If for either reason the iteration of the line does not track Perry's movements around the aisles, then the ground of the realization vanishes. The indexical conclusion has, as a necessary ground, numerical premises. In Perry's narration, this is of course there, but the repetition is insufficiently conspicuous. We're told to think of the trail as getting thicker, as if that were a change in quality of a single thing. But it doesn't matter if the unary traits overlap and interfere with each other. The resulting thickness is still a clue only if it can be grasped as a repetition. Otherwise, one might substitute any other reason for the trail to be thicker. Say it's made of substance that expands when dropped on the floor. Then this is no longer a reason for stopping. And because this is no longer a reason, we realize that the number was a reason. The insight takes the form of the halting of a regress. I stop because I realize that the unary trait will continue to repeat, never coming to a halt from the inside. I can only halt it by finding myself suddenly outside of the series, and thus able to make this non-halting into the object of a finite thought. Once we pass through diagonalization, we'll see that the connection of the punctuality of indexical insight with the observation of an infinite regress is not coincidental. Such an observation can be taken in two ways. It can be taken up in two ways. As an I dissolving or I reconstituting insight. Taken the first way, the subject that says I experiences itself as split into a blind mechanical repetition illuminated by an equally inorganic moment of truth, which is nothing other than the recognition of that automatism. What could be more exhilarating and inhuman? But it's very easy at the next moment to turn just this into the reconstitution of the humanist illusion. All that is necessary, all that is required, is to draw the conclusion that I am at once the subject and object of a single insight, that is, to essentialize the indexical. If I have time, I'll really try to move to a brief tour. If not, I'm fine with stopping here.
I think something brief would be fine. We need about, I don't know, 20 minutes for the break. Is that feeling good? So we can
Okay.
go until 40 past.
Then let me put it this way. I think I'm going to skip a parallel case from Capellan and Dever, which is very much worth talking about. I think it's Wittgenstein who really takes the first step toward breaking the spell here. In the one proposition from the Tractatus that I think is absolutely sublime and doesn't go with the rest of the book. You can see it in the middle there at 5.542. It is clear, however, that A believes that P, A has the thought P, and A says P are of the form P, in quotes, says P. Sorry, I was trying to get it to move. And this does not involve the correlation of a fact with an object, but rather the correlation of facts by means of the correlation of their objects. This shows, too, that there is no such thing as the soul, the subject, etc., as it is conceived in the superficial psychology of the present day, and above also in the superficial epistemology of the present day, although he keeps the word away from Russell and Moore. So that's going to launch us into an eliminativist zone with respect to the indexical. The indexical is at first going to recede entirely from sight. After all, what's going on in the Tractatus is the very paradigm of a system based entirely on iconic relations, right? This is the so-called picture theory, even if it's not a theory. The Tractatus, however, does not, in my judgment, follow up in the right way on this insight. Instead, we get the subject transcendentalized, returning as coordinate with the limits of the world, the limits of its world. So we're going to talk about, I'm going to draw on other sources to talk about the alternatives here. I take it to be a failure of imagination at that point. So I'll draw on Frege and Russell, talking about why a miscount of the form that Wittgenstein seems to be correcting is in fact necessary, because they'll both make essential reference to a failure of language to keep track of its own quotational levels. Korzybski, a non-canonical figure who I like very much, is going to grasp some of the existential importance of this very quickly, describing the miscount as a conflation of words and things, and as a kind of insanity. The same thing is going to be true of Freud's unconscious, particularly as it comes out in Verneinung. it's not enough to notice that the Freudian unconscious knows nothing of negation. We have to notice that the negation that is in question is a negation that involves semantic assent. It's really because the unconscious would have to quote itself in order to negate itself that it knows nothing of negation, because it's right there at the point where P and quote P cannot be distinguished. Oh, that's much too quick, of course. I'm going to show how Sartre, of all people, can be read misquotationally, and then pass on to the Cahiers group. So then we get misquotationalism in general in the context of the system, and that's going to give us license to look at that system as a whole and diagonalize out of it. What that demonstrates, and I'm sorry for not working it through in detail here, what that demonstrates is the promise I mentioned at the beginning. When you diagonalize out of any such system, what you get is a relation that testifies to its own lack of an index. Why does that matter? It matters because it can't refer only to itself, but instead refers to a much greater multiplicity of relations than the one that you started with, regardless of whether the one that you started with is finite or infinite. I'll catch that out in terms of Condra's theorem. And if that's all correct, then I suggest that there may be a mismatch between the indexicalists' ethical aims and their logical means. To say that to be is to be indexed is supposed to free us up for a greater richness of relationality, I think, but has, I think, the opposite effect. Sorry, that was all very quick, but I'll stop there.
Yes, I'm muted.
Well, we have to decide things about time. If we're going to have a little bit of a discussion, I think maybe we're going to have to even start the next session late. I don't know. Shall we try and have like 10 minutes, Paul?
Fine with me.
Okay. I myself would have like being very interested in discussing some of the things. Maybe we can do it when the written version comes or something. But if I have time, I'll make 3 or 4 comments. But I can say the people want to speak. So yeah, let's move to them.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so thanks a lot. Thanks very much indeed, John, for a very interesting presentation. I want to make a very brief comment and a very brief question. Please feel free to choose what you want to engage with, because we don't have much time. First, I'm extremely interested in the distinction that you've drawn between substance and form as regards the qualification of what universals can and cannot be. They're not to be repelled from an indexicalist theoretical framework. I actually find these extremely helpful, and if I understand you correctly, as a sort of invitation to rethink Plato both before and after Aristotle. Well, that's the brief comment. The question is about the term diagonalization that you've started to use in the introductory part of your presentation, in the mnemonics, and to which you have come several times afterwards. Would you agree to say that diagonalization is something like perhaps the most appropriate name for a relation, that between the essential and the existential indexicals, due to the fact that that relation cannot be straightforward, in the sense that the latter, the existential indexical, forces, if I understand you correctly, the reinscription of the former through its redistribution. To be is to be indexed.
I think I agree with you on both counts. So yes, it's definitely an invitation to a contemporary Platonism, which has to be critical of the entire Aristotelian tradition of substance in retrospect, and has to draw its metamathematical resources from Kantor, Gödel, Turing, Tarski, etc. That's at least, I know I'm not making a full case for that right now, but that's precisely my view, that the return to a mathematical dialectic a la Plato can be realized by paying attention to these great metamathematical theorems, all of which have the common structure of diagonalization. And if I understood you, very much yes to the second as well. The essential indirectness of the discovery of this exception that the existential indexical is, in that it is a witness to the general lack of indices. But in its own being, it is an excessive indexical. And if you'll forgive me, I think there's an ethics that goes along with that I'm very attracted to, namely global nihilism and local motivation. So you get to say, for once, and this takes us a step beyond Plato, who's always take the geometry lesson, for example, right? You have in the Meno, you have this amazing demonstration of the capacity to non-paradoxically think the unthought, and then it's as if he can't quite take it. He has to reframe it in terms of a cosmic whole of intelligibility. But the real content of anamnesis is what's actually accomplished in the geometry lesson, not the myth. And I think that holds true of all of Plato's myths, which are horribly boring and unbeautiful. So in place of being totalized by that cosmic intelligibility that some people think is a Platonism of the whole, instead of that, we get the transcending impulse toward truth and the imperative to go beyond the conceptual frameworks in which we're embedded, not on the condition that there is such a global intelligibility, but on the condition that there isn't. Was that in any way responsive?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, if no one else wants to say anything, I'm going to say a few things very quickly, John. That I think this should be best taken as an invitation for further conversation, because I don't think we're going to exhaust this in 5 minutes. I think, and first thing is, I mean. Indexes and indexicals, yeah. I think that's I mean, I think, you know, there is a lot of confusion that could be made from that. The indexical, the essential indexical has to be read to me as the indexical, say, demonstrative, right? So the indexical, let's call it essential demonstrative for a second, yeah. So the essential demonstrative, in a sense, is to be taken together with the account of demonstratives that people were looking for in the 70s from the efforts of Kaplan on. Now things become. I think there's an important difference between Perry's project and Kaplan's project. In fact, for instance, it's funny that Kaplan has this text, I don't know how well known it is, it's called How to Rest a Frigate Church. And there he divides the history of philosophy between the Haxitists and the anti-Haxitists. So basically, the idea is that those that believe in singularity and singular thought, and those that don't believe in singularity in singular thought. And then, of course, I mean, he places Russell among the good ones, which are the Haxitists. And of course, he places Frege on the other side, etc. I mean, you can discuss this, but I mean, the general gist of it is, I think, is something that is that can be understood. Now, what is interesting is that finally, what he means by that is only singularity, that is direct thought or direct positions. So that's what he has in mind. But in fact, he uses a word that is itself ambiguous, which is axatus, which is pointing at something that is non-qualitative, but at the same time, he's pointing at some kind of thisness, some kind of essential indexical, or essential demonstrative. Mm-hmm. So in a sense, it's like this is how the ambiguity comes, and I think Indexicalism has to make sure that it's not about just rejecting the dicto statement in favor of direct statements. These direct statements are fundamentally indexical, and I think that's crucial. So, for instance, you can index things, right, in the sense of indexes, but indexicals involve a kind of a position among these things, and then you say that relations. A lot of relations are not indexed, not in the sense of indexed like that, yeah? But I think one thing that Indexicalism wants to do is to reject substantivism, which involves both Aristotelian substances and their offspring, but also relations full stop. I mean, it's not a metaphysics of relationality, it's a metaphysics of positioned relationality. Mm-hmm. I think that is a big difference. And that, for instance, is the way. For instance, I think that's is part of the message of Perry in the example of the trail. Basically, relationality here we have to involve the position where I am, and when I discover that I am the messy shopper, then everything changes. And the last thing I was going to say is this. I don't think that numbers are essential or numbers or quantity are essential. It's easy to think of an example that is very discussed in the literature, which is a mirror example. I myself am right now sort of dealing with that because I'm trying to defend the variation of Kaplan's account of demonstratives against what what I've been calling, as I referred before, the neo-Fregeans, who tend to believe that Kaplan is fully wrong. And I think one situation where Kaplan is wrong is the situation of the mirror, yeah. Because basically, if, for instance, give an example, the example that is often given, like I see myself in the mirror. I don't realize there is a mirror, right? And I am on fire. So I have these two beliefs. I am not on fire. You are on fire, right? And I think, for instance, the problem with Kaplan is that, well, what is this? Which object is on fire? So if you resolve for content, if you resolve for objects, then you're in trouble, right? I think if I want to go the way I want to go, and not resolve for objects, but resolve for indexicals. In this context, I call these things addresses, right? Which are indexicals, are positional. If I want to resolve for indexicals, I'm also in trouble, right? And that's the only sort of major situation where I carry on being in trouble. But that's also a situation where you have the essential indexical, because basically when I discover that I am on fire, then, the Paris story goes on, and there is no number here of, you know, more. It's just that I find out that there was a mirror when I didn't realize. So it doesn't seem to me, even though I think we can carry on discussing, because maybe I missed something here. I have the impression that the number is not essential. Let's put it this way. So that's and the last final comment is interesting that you mentioned the Tractatus, because I do believe that there is a hint, and I wrote this somewhere, there is a hint in the Tractatus towards indexical propositions, but that's kind of another story altogether.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm kind of glad that you confirmed what I thought was the indexicalists' gambit here. And in order to break the deadlock, yeah, we need to do a lot more discussion about the respective theoretical merits of founding extensional relations on indexical ones versus vice versa. And I would certainly look forward to that. And now I owe you a mathematical account of the mirror case.
Right.
Okay, well, with that, let me thank you, John. And of course, you know, it will not surprise you, I have a lot to say, which I'm not going to say now because of the limitations of time. But yeah, with that, I think we'll end this session. And are we going to reconvene at the hour, or do we take longer?
I just wanted to say something. Shall we start at 10 past? Yeah, and I'm going to send my text with my responses to you by email in a few minutes. So yeah, check it out. Then you can follow, because it's going to leave. Otherwise, I won't have enough time. So I'll send it to you by email right now.